When billionaire Ethan Calloway walked into the Velvet Room that rainy Tuesday night, he had no idea the trembling waitress refilling his wine glass controlled more money than he'd ever see in his lifetime. What started as public humiliation in front of New York's elite became the biggest mistake of his career because Claire Bennett wasn't just serving tables. She was deciding whether to destroy him. This is a story about power, redemption, and the dangerous assumption that quiet people have nothing to lose. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And hit that like button if you're ready for what happens next. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The rain hit Manhattan like it had a personal vendetta that Tuesday evening, turning the streets into rivers of brake lights and honking taxis. Inside the Velvet Room, though, you'd never know the city was drowning. The restaurant existed in its own universe. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths so crisp they could cut you, and the kind of hushed atmosphere that came with entrees costing more than most people's rent. Ethan Calloway stepped through the mahogany doors at exactly 7:47 p.m., and the temperature in the room dropped about 5 degrees. Not literally, but close enough. He moved like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to ask for anything. His charcoal suit probably worth more than the head waiter's car. At 32, Ethan had the kind of face that photographers loved. Sharp jawline, dark eyes that never quite smiled even when his mouth did, and the permanent expression of someone calculating your net worth while shaking your hand. Mr. Calloway? The maitre d' appeared instantly, the way staff always did for people like Ethan. Your table is ready. The gentlemen are already waiting. Ethan didn't thank him. He just moved. Behind him, 3 business associates followed like well-dressed shadows. Richard Chen, his CFO, was already on his phone. Marcus Webb, the lead investor on the Hudson Yards project, kept checking his watch. And David Park, the acquisition specialist who'd made a career out of finding legal loopholes, just looked tired. They'd just come from a meeting that had gone 7 hours longer than scheduled. The kind of meeting where lawyers spoke in paragraphs and everyone left with a headache and a vague sense they'd either made millions or lost everything. Ethan couldn't tell which yet, and that uncertainty sat in his stomach like broken glass. The private dining room in the back was everything the main restaurant was, but more. Exclusive, isolated. The kind of space where deals got made and careers got buried. Finally, Marcus dropped into his chair without waiting for anyone else to sit. I thought Patterson was never going to shut up about the environmental assessments. He won't be a problem. Ethan's voice was flat, final. He pulled out his chair and sat down with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to control every movement, every gesture, every micro-expression that might give away what he was actually thinking. I have 3 different contractors willing to testify. The delays are purely bureaucratic. We'll bury him in paperwork until he gives up or dies, whichever comes first. Richard winced slightly, but said nothing. He'd learned years ago that objecting to Ethan's methods was a waste of breath. Ruthless. David actually smiled. I like it. I'm not ruthless. Ethan loosened his tie just enough to breathe. I'm efficient. There's a difference. The door opened and a waitress appeared with menus and water glasses balanced on a tray that trembled just slightly in her hands. Claire Bennett was 30 years old and looked like someone who'd spent most of her life trying to be invisible. Average height, dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, minimal makeup, and a uniform that seemed designed to help her blend into the expensive wallpaper. She moved carefully, like someone navigating a room full of landmines. Good evening, gentlemen. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. Can I start you with something to drink? Scotch. Neat. Top shelf. Marcus didn't look up from his phone. The same. David finally took his coat off. Water's fine for me. Richard tried to smile at her, but she was already writing, not making eye contact. Ethan looked at her for the first time, and something in his expression shifted. Not softer, just focused, the way a wolf focuses on movement in the periphery. You have a 2015 Chateau Margaux? Claire nodded, still not meeting his eyes. Yes, sir. Bring the bottle. And 4 glasses, even though these lightweights apparently don't appreciate decent wine. Hey, Marcus looked up. Some of us have to drive home. That's what drivers are for. Ethan turned back to Claire, who was still standing there with her pen hovering over the notepad. Was there something else? No, sir. I'll bring that right away. She left quickly, the door closing behind her with a soft click. "You're in a mood tonight," Richard finally said what everyone was thinking. "I'm always in a mood." Ethan pulled out his phone, scanned 3 emails, deleted 2 without reading them completely, and set it face down on the table. "It's called focus. It's called being an asshole." Marcus grinned when he said it, but there was truth underneath. "When's the last time you took a day off? When's the last time you closed a deal worth more than $50 million? Ethan shot back. "Fair point." The conversation shifted to business, numbers, projections, timelines, risk assessments. The kind of talk that sounded like English but might as well have been another language if you weren't part of that world. Ethan listened more than he spoke, letting the others talk themselves into circles while he waited for the actual useful information to emerge from all the corporate jargon. Claire returned with the wine bottle and 4 glasses on a tray. She set them down carefully, one at a time, her movements precise and practiced. "Would you like me to pour, sir?" Ethan gestured vaguely. "Go ahead." She uncorked the bottle, a sound like a whisper in the quiet room, and began pouring. Her hand shook just barely, a tremor so small you'd miss it if you weren't paying attention. Ethan was always paying attention. The wine hit the first glass perfectly, dark red, almost black in the low light. The second glass went just as smoothly, but when she reached for the third glass, her sleeve caught on the edge of Richard's water glass. Everything happened in slow motion and all at once. The water glass tipped. Richard reached for it instinctively. Claire jerked back to avoid his hand. The wine bottle tilted. And suddenly there was red wine everywhere, across the white tablecloth, splashing onto Marcus's sleeve, a few drops hitting Ethan's phone. The room went silent. Claire froze, the bottle still in her hand, her face going pale. "I'm so sorry. I'll get towels right away. You'll what?" Ethan's voice cut through her, stammering like a blade through silk. He picked up his phone, looked at the wine-spotted screen, and set it down with exaggerated care. "You'll fix this? You'll unspill a $300 bottle of wine?" "Sir, I didn't mean—" "No one ever means to be incompetent." Ethan leaned back in his chair, and somehow that made him more intimidating than if he'd stood up and yelled. "They just are, and the rest of us have to deal with the consequences." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Ethan, it was an accident. An accident caused by carelessness. By someone who clearly isn't qualified to be working in a restaurant like this." Ethan kept his eyes on Claire, who looked like she might actually disappear if she could figure out how. "What's your name?" "Claire, sir." "Claire." He said it like he was testing how it tasted. "How long have you worked here, Claire?" 6 months. 6 months, and you still can't pour wine without destroying the table." Ethan glanced at the others, performing now, feeding off their discomfort. "Remind me, what's the point of paying premium prices if the service is the same as a truck stop diner?" Claire's hands were shaking harder now, clutching the wine bottle like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "I'll get the manager, sir. We'll comp your entire meal, and—" "I don't want the meal comped." Ethan's voice went quieter, which somehow made it worse. "I want competent staff who can do their jobs without turning the dining room into a disaster zone. But I suppose that's too much to ask." Marcus laughed, uncomfortable, trying to diffuse the tension. "Come on, Ethan. It's just wine." "It's not about the wine." Ethan finally looked away from Claire, dismissing her entirely. "It's about standards, excellence, things this establishment clearly doesn't prioritize anymore." David jumped in, sensing an opportunity to impress. "Didn't you say you were looking at acquiring this building?" Ethan's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth whatsoever. "I am, actually. The property's been on my radar for 3 months. Historic building, prime location, current ownership is a disaster waiting to happen." Claire was still standing there, frozen in place, the wine bottle clutched in both hands now. Ethan noticed and turned back to her. "Still here? I thought you were getting towels." "Yes, sir, right away." But before she could move, Ethan continued, his voice carrying just loud enough that the nearby tables could probably hear. "In fact, once I close the deal, and I will close it, this entire place is getting restructured. New management, new standards, and definitely new staff." The words landed like stones in deep water. "You can't fire everyone." Claire's voice was barely a whisper, but everyone heard it. "Can't I?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. I think you'll find that property owners can do pretty much whatever they want with their buildings, including cleaning out staff who can't handle basic table service. Claire's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, hurt, anger, and then something else, something harder to read. She set the wine bottle down on the table with a soft clink. "I'll send someone to clean this up." She turned and walked out before anyone could respond. The room stayed quiet for a moment after she left. "That was brutal, even for you," Richard finally said, keeping his voice low. Ethan shrugged and picked up his wine glass from the only spot on the table that hadn't been destroyed. "She needed to hear it. Better from me than from whoever takes over after I own the place." "You really think you'll get the building?" Marcus asked. "I know I will." Ethan took a sip of the wine that Claire had managed to pour before everything went wrong. It was perfect, of course, deep and complex and worth every penny of that $300 price tag. The current owner is some old trust fund situation. They haven't done proper maintenance in years, the permits are a nightmare, and they're bleeding money every quarter. They'll take my offer because they won't have a choice. David pulled out his tablet and started scrolling through documents. "I've got the preliminary assessments here. Structure's solid, location is prime, and once we gut the restaurant and convert it to luxury retail on the ground floor with residential above, we'll triple the property value in 18 months. Ethan finished the thought. "I know. I've run the numbers 17 different ways. This is happening." A different waitress appeared, older, more composed, with towels and apologies. She cleaned up the mess with professional efficiency while Ethan and his associates pretended she didn't exist and went back to discussing the Hudson Yards project. Claire didn't come back. The manager did, though, about 20 minutes later. He was a thin man in his 50s with worry lines carved deep around his eyes and the kind of nervous energy that came from years of dealing with difficult customers and impossible situations. "Mr. Calloway." He approached the table like someone walking toward a firing squad. "I want to personally apologize for what happened earlier. Claire is one of our most reliable employees, and this is completely out of character." "I don't care about her character." Ethan didn't look up from the menu he was pretending to read. "I care about competent service. Is that something your establishment can provide, or should we take our business elsewhere?" The manager's face went a shade paler. "Of course, sir. Absolutely. I've already spoken with Claire, and she's been reassigned for the evening. Your meal tonight is completely on the house, and I already told her I don't want it comped." Ethan finally looked up, and his expression was pure ice. "I want what I paid for. Good food, good wine, and staff who know what they're doing. Can you provide that or not?" "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir." "Then stop apologizing and bring us the menu." The manager practically ran away. Richard waited until he was gone before speaking. "You know you're going to give that poor guy a heart attack. Then he should find a less stressful career." Ethan went back to his phone, scrolling through emails without really reading them. His daughter's school had sent 3 messages about some upcoming event he'd already forgotten about. His assistant had forwarded him a contract that needed signing by tomorrow morning. And his mother had called twice, which he was ignoring on principle. The rest of dinner passed without incident. The food was exceptional. Seared scallops, Wagyu steak cooked exactly medium rare, some kind of chocolate thing for dessert that probably had a French name Ethan couldn't pronounce and didn't care to learn. They talked business, made plans, argued about timelines and budgets, and whether they should go after the Brooklyn project before or after closing the Velvet Room deal. Claire never reappeared. Ethan noticed her absence the way you notice a missing piece in a puzzle. Not because you're looking for it specifically, but because something feels incomplete. Every time the door opened and it wasn't her, some part of his brain registered the information and filed it away. He told himself it didn't matter. She was just a waitress. Replaceable, forgettable. But when they were settling the bill 2 hours later, he found himself asking, "The waitress from earlier, is she still here?" The new server, a young man with perfect posture and a corporate smile, shook his head. "Claire left for the evening, sir. Is there anything I can help you with?" "No." Ethan signed the receipt, added a tip that was generous enough to be professional, but not so generous that it implied apology, and stood up. His back hurt from too many hours sitting in conference rooms, and he had a headache forming behind his left eye that warned of a long night ahead. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The city looked cleaner somehow, washed and reflective and almost beautiful if you ignored the smell of hot garbage and car exhaust. His driver was waiting with the car idling at the curb, a black Mercedes that cost more than some people's houses. Ethan slid into the back seat and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Where to, Mr. Calloway?" The driver's voice came through the intercom. "Home." The car pulled away from the curb, merging into traffic with practiced ease. Ethan watched the city slide past his window, lights and movement, and millions of people living their lives in ways he'd never understand or care to. His phone buzzed with another email from his assistant, another message from his mother, another notification about something that needed his attention. He ignored them all and thought about his daughter instead. Sophie was 7 years old and the only person in the world who could make Ethan feel like a complete failure and the luckiest man alive in the same breath. She had his dark hair and his wife's smile and absolutely none of his tolerance for bullshit. When he left for the meeting that morning, she'd hugged him tight and made him promise to be home before bedtime. He checked his watch. 10:43 p.m. Another broken promise to add to the collection. The house was dark when he arrived except for the light in Sophie's room and the glow from the kitchen where his housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, was probably waiting to scold him about missing dinner again. She waited up as long as she could. Mrs. Chen appeared in the hallway before Ethan even got his coat off. She was a small Chinese woman in her 60s who'd been raising other people's children for 40 years and had absolutely no patience for excuses. "Asked me 6 times if you were coming home soon." Guilt twisted in Ethan's stomach. "I'll go check on her. She's asleep now. Don't wake her up just to make yourself feel better." Mrs. Chen's bluntness was one of the reasons Ethan kept her around, even when it made him want to fire her at least once a week. She was right more often than he wanted to admit. "How is she today?" "Good. Happy. Drew you about 50 pictures that are covering the fridge now." Mrs. Chen started walking toward the kitchen, and Ethan followed. "There's dinner if you're hungry. I made extra, even though I knew you'd probably skip it." "I ate already." "Business dinner doesn't count. Sit down. Eat." Ethan sat down at the kitchen island because arguing with Mrs. Chen was like arguing with gravity. Technically possible, but ultimately pointless. She set a plate in front of him with some kind of stir-fry that smelled better than anything he'd eaten at the restaurant. She asked about her mother again. Mrs. Chen said it casually, like it wasn't a bomb she'd just dropped into the middle of the quiet kitchen. Ethan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "What did you tell her?" "The same thing I always tell her, that her mother loved her very much, and sometimes people get sick, and it's not anyone's fault." Ethan set the fork down without eating. His wife had been dead for 5 years. Cancer, aggressive and brutal, and completely unstoppable, despite every treatment and experimental drug and specialist Ethan's money could buy. Sophie barely remembered her, which somehow made it worse. "She's too young to understand the details." Ethan's voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. "She's 7, not stupid. She knows something's missing." Mrs. Chen started wiping down counters that were already clean. "And she knows you're gone all the time. I'm providing for her." "You're hiding from her." The words hit harder than they should have. Ethan stood up, his appetite completely gone. "I'm not having this conversation tonight." "You never want to have this conversation. That's the problem." But Mrs. Chen's voice softened slightly. "She needs her father, Mr. Calloway, not a bank account and an empty house." Ethan didn't respond. He just walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs to Sophie's room, moving quietly so he wouldn't wake her. She was asleep in her bed, curled up with a stuffed elephant that had seen better days. The nightlight cast soft shadows across her face, and Ethan stood in the doorway watching her breathe, feeling that familiar mixture of overwhelming love and crushing inadequacy. The wall next to her bed was covered in drawings, stick figures and rainbows and houses with windows that looked like they were melting. One caught his eye, a new addition from today probably. It showed 2 figures holding hands, one big, one small. The big one had dark scribbles for hair and what might have been a suit. The small one had a huge smile. "Daddy and me" was written across the top in Sophie's careful 7-year-old handwriting. Ethan felt something crack in his chest. He left before it could break completely, closing the door with a soft click and walking to his home office at the end of the hall. The room was exactly what you'd expect. Dark wood, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and enough technology to run a small corporation. He poured himself a scotch from the bar cart, stood at the window, and looked out at Manhattan glittering below him like a circuit board made of light. His phone buzzed. David, sending over contracts for the Velvet Room deal. Ethan opened them without really reading, his mind elsewhere. He thought about Claire, the waitress who'd trembled while pouring wine and then walked away with her dignity intact despite everything he'd said. He thought about the manager's fear, the other staff's careful avoidance of eye contact, the way the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath whenever he spoke. He thought about power and what it cost to maintain it, and then he stopped thinking about it entirely, because thinking about things like that led nowhere useful. He finished his scotch, signed the contracts, sent 3 emails, and finally went to bed around 2 a.m. with the kind of exhaustion that came from running too fast for too long in a direction you weren't even sure was right anymore. He dreamed about his wife, which he hadn't done in months. She was standing in the Velvet Room wearing her hospital gown, looking at him with disappointment in her eyes. "You used to be kind," she said in the dream. Ethan woke up at 5 a.m. with his heart racing and the taste of regret in his mouth. He got up, showered, put on another expensive suit, and checked his phone to find 17 new messages. One was from Sophie's school about parent-teacher conferences. He deleted it without reading the details. By 6:30 a.m., he was in his car heading to the office, leaving before Sophie woke up because it was easier than watching her face fall when he told her he couldn't have breakfast with her. Mrs. Chen was right. He was hiding. But hiding felt safer than facing the fact that he'd turned into someone his wife wouldn't recognize, raising a daughter who barely knew him, building an empire on the backs of people he treated like obstacles instead of humans. The office was empty when he arrived, the way he liked it. Quiet, controlled. No one asking him questions he didn't want to answer or looking at him with expectations he couldn't meet. He worked for 3 hours straight, approving budgets, reviewing architectural plans, negotiating contracts with lawyers who billed by the minute. The Velvet Room deal was moving forward faster than expected. The current ownership had sent preliminary signals that they were willing to talk numbers. Ethan should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt tired. His assistant, Jennifer, arrived at 9 a.m. with coffee and a stack of documents that needed his signature. She was efficient, competent, and smart enough to never ask personal questions. "The Henderson meeting is at 11. She set everything on his desk with practiced precision. "The architects want to discuss the Hudson Yards modifications at 2, and Sophie's school called again about handle it." Ethan signed a contract without reading past the first paragraph. "They specifically asked for you to call back." "I said handle it, Jennifer." She didn't argue, just made a note on her tablet and left. Ethan stared at the contract he'd just signed, trying to remember what it was for. Development permits for something. Brooklyn, maybe. The words blurred together. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered it anyway because sometimes unknown numbers were business opportunities. "Calloway?" "Mr. Calloway." The voice was female, calm, and vaguely familiar. "This is Claire Bennett. We met last night at the Velvet Room." Ethan sat up straighter, his brain shifting into focus. "I'm surprised you called. Most people who get fired don't follow up." "I didn't get fired." There was something in her voice now, an edge he hadn't heard when she was holding the wine bottle. "And I'm not calling to apologize if that's what you're expecting." "Then why are you calling?" "Because you made a threat last night in front of your business associates. You said you were going to buy the Velvet Room building and fire everyone who works there. I said I was restructuring. There's a difference. Not to the 37 people who depend on those jobs to feed their families." Claire's voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath. "I'm calling to ask you to reconsider." Ethan almost laughed. "You're calling to ask me to reconsider a multi-million-dollar business decision because you feel bad for the staff? That's not how business works." "I know exactly how business works, Mr. Calloway." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, you're a waitress with no leverage calling a billionaire and asking him to change his plans out of the kindness of his heart. That's not business. That's naive." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "You're right. I don't have leverage. Not the kind you're thinking of, anyway." "Then we don't have anything else to discuss." "We might, if you're willing to listen for 5 minutes." Ethan checked his watch. He had 45 minutes before the Henderson meeting, and something about the way Claire was speaking made him curious despite himself. "Fine. You have 5 minutes. Talk. Meet me at the Velvet Room tonight, 8 p.m., and I'll show you why buying that building is a bigger mistake than you realize. That's not an explanation. That's a setup. It's an opportunity to see something you missed. But if you're too afraid to show up, I'm not afraid of anything. The words came out sharper than Ethan intended. Then prove it. 8 p.m. Come alone. The line went dead before Ethan could respond. He sat there staring at his phone, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. A waitress he'd humiliated last night had just challenged him to a meeting using language that sounded almost like, no, impossible. But the seed of doubt was planted, and Ethan hated doubt. He called David. Pull every piece of information we have on the Velvet Room. Ownership structure, trust documents, board members, everything. I thought we already had all that. Pull it again. And this time, look for anything unusual. Hidden clauses, secondary ownership, trust fund arrangements, anything that doesn't fit the standard corporate structure. Looking for something specific? I'll know it when I see it. Have it on my desk by 5. Ethan hung up and stared out his office window at the city below. Somewhere out there, a waitress named Claire Bennett thought she had information that would change his mind about a deal he'd been planning for months. She was probably bluffing, but Ethan didn't get where he was by ignoring potential threats, no matter how unlikely they seemed. He'd go to the meeting. He'd let her waste his time for 5 minutes, and then he'd proceed exactly as planned, because that's what winners did. They didn't get distracted by soft-spoken women with trembling hands and impossible claims, even when something in the back of his mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, he'd miscalculated something important. David had the files on Ethan's desk by 4:47 p.m., 13 minutes early, which was either impressive or concerning depending on how you looked at it. Found something interesting. David dropped the folder with enough force that papers scattered across the polished surface. The ownership structure is buried under about 6 layers of corporate entities and trust arrangements. Took me 3 hours and 2 very annoyed paralegals to untangle it. Ethan picked up the top document, scanning the corporate names. Bennett Holdings, that's the primary trust? Yeah, established in 1987 by Theodore Bennett. Old money, real estate mostly, some tech investments in the 90s that paid off big. He died about 8 years ago, left everything to his granddaughter with some very specific conditions attached. What kind of conditions? David flipped through his notes. She had to work regular jobs for a minimum of 10 years before taking active control of the holdings. Some kind of character building thing, I guess. Rich people do weird stuff with their money. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. The granddaughter's name. Doesn't say. The trust documents keep the beneficiary anonymous for privacy reasons. All transactions go through a law firm. Whitmore and Associates, very exclusive, very expensive. They've been managing the Bennett estate since the old man died. So we don't know who actually owns the building. We know it's whoever inherited the Bennett fortune, but that's where the trail ends. The lawyers won't talk, and the trust documents are sealed tighter than Fort Knox. David sat down across from Ethan's desk. Why the sudden paranoia? This deal's been straightforward from the beginning. Ethan didn't answer. He was thinking about Claire's voice on the phone, the certainty in her words, the way she'd said she knew exactly how business worked. Pull everything you can find on a Claire Bennett, 30 years old, currently works as a waitress at the Velvet Room. I want to know where she went to school, where she's lived, any family connections, employment history, everything. David's eyebrows went up. The waitress from last night? Ethan, what's going on? Probably nothing, but I don't like loose ends. You think she's connected to the Bennett Trust? I think she made a phone call that was too confident for someone who should be terrified of losing her job, and I want to know why. David stood up, already pulling out his phone. I'll have something by 6. He left, and Ethan sat alone in his office with the Bennett Holdings files spread across his desk, like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite see the shape of yet. His phone buzzed. Sophie's school again. He ignored it. At 6:15, David sent an email with a subject line that made Ethan's blood run cold. You need to see this. The attached file was brief but devastating. Claire Elizabeth Bennett. Born in Manhattan, raised by her grandfather Theodore Bennett after her parents died in a car accident when she was 3. Private schools, art history degree from Columbia, no employment history until 6 years ago when she started working entry-level jobs. Barista, bookstore clerk, museum docent, and most recently, waitress. Current estimated net worth, $2.7 billion. Ethan read the number 3 times to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. The woman he'd humiliated in front of a restaurant full of people, the waitress whose hand had trembled while pouring wine, owned more money than Ethan had spent in his entire career. And he'd threatened to fire her. His phone rang. David. "Tell me you're seeing what I'm seeing." David's voice was tight. "I'm seeing it." "Holy shit, Ethan, she owns the building. She owns the whole damn portfolio. 12 properties across Manhattan, investment stakes in half the major developments from the last decade, and a legal team that could bury us in paperwork for the next century if they wanted to." Ethan's mind was racing, calculating, trying to find an angle that didn't end with him looking like a complete fool. The trust document said she couldn't take active control for 10 years. How long has it been since her grandfather died? 8 years. She's got 2 more years before the conditions are fully met. But according to the trust structure, she's been able to make certain decisions through her legal representatives for the last 3 years, including property sales. So when I made an offer on the building, it went directly to her lawyers, who almost certainly told her about it. And about you. David paused. She's been watching this whole thing play out. Probably knew exactly who you were when you walked into the restaurant last night. The realization hit like a physical blow. Claire hadn't been a random waitress who'd stumbled into his path. She'd been there deliberately, working in a restaurant she owned, serving people who had no idea they were being evaluated by someone who could buy and sell them without thinking twice. And Ethan had treated her like she was beneath him. "What do you want me to do?" David asked. "Nothing. I'll handle this." "Ethan, if she decides to reject the offer out of spite," "I said I'll handle it." Ethan hung up before David could argue and sat in the gathering darkness of his office, watching the city lights blink on one by one as evening settled over Manhattan. He'd built his career on reading people, on understanding leverage and motivation and weakness, but he'd missed this completely. Walked right past a billionaire and seen only a trembling waitress, because that's what he'd expected to see. His wife's voice from the dream echoed in his head. "You used to be kind." Ethan finished the rest of his work on autopilot, signed documents without reading them, sent emails that probably didn't make sense, and left the office at 7:30 with enough time to make the 8 o'clock meeting. He didn't bring security, didn't bring lawyers or associates or anyone who could provide backup if this went sideways. Claire had said, "Come alone," and for once in his life, Ethan was going to do exactly what someone else asked. The Velvet Room looked different at night without the chaos of business dinners and important clients. Quieter, more intimate. The kind of place where secrets could be shared over wine and nobody would hear. Claire was waiting at the same table where everything had fallen apart the night before. She wasn't wearing the waitress uniform. Instead, she had on dark slacks and a simple gray sweater that probably cost more than Ethan's suit if you knew where to look for the label. She didn't stand when he approached, just gestured to the chair across from her. "You came. You knew I would." Ethan sat down, keeping his expression neutral. "You wanted to show me why buying this building is a mistake. I'm listening." Claire smiled, and it wasn't the nervous, apologetic expression from last night. This smile had edges. "Before we get to that, I need to know something. When you threatened to fire everyone last night, did you mean it? Or were you just performing for your business partners? Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Ethan considered lying, then decided against it. "Both. I meant it, and I was performing. That's how power works. You make statements that serve multiple purposes." "That's honest, at least." Claire poured wine into 2 glasses with steady hands, not a tremor in sight. "This is the same bottle from last night, the one I spilled. I had them save it." "Sentimental?" "Practical. It cost $300 and most of it didn't end up on the floor." She pushed 1 glass toward him. "Drink with me, Mr. Calloway, and then we'll talk about mistakes." Ethan picked up the glass but didn't drink yet. "You're Claire Bennett, Theodore Bennett's granddaughter. You own this building and about a dozen others. Your net worth is approximately $2.7 billion, and you've been working service jobs for the last 6 years as part of your inheritance conditions. Did you pull that information before or after I called you?" "After. I don't like surprises." "And yet, here you are, surprised anyway." Claire took a sip of her wine, watching him over the rim of the glass. "What else do you know?" "That you've been watching me plan this acquisition for months. That my offer went through your lawyers and you could have rejected it immediately, but didn't. That you were here last night specifically to see what kind of man wanted to buy your building. Very good. What else? That I humiliated you in front of a room full of people while you were deciding whether to sell me the most valuable property in your portfolio. Ethan set his glass down without drinking. I'm assuming the answer is no now. You're assuming wrong. Claire leaned back in her chair. I haven't made a decision yet. That's why you're here. You're telling me that after everything I said last night, you're still considering selling to me. I'm considering giving you a chance to convince me you're not the person you pretended to be. Claire's expression shifted into something harder to read. My grandfather left me a fortune, but more importantly, he left me a philosophy. He believed that wealth without understanding was worthless. That's why he made me work these jobs, so I'd know what it felt like to be on the other side of power. And what did you learn? That most people in your position treat service workers like they're invisible, like they're part of the furniture, there to be used and discarded when they're not useful anymore. Claire's voice stayed level, but there was anger underneath. You were worse than most, Mr. Calloway. You didn't just ignore me, you actively tried to humiliate me. You're right, I did. The admission felt like swallowing glass, but Ethan forced it out anyway. I was having a bad day and I took it out on someone who couldn't fight back. That's not an excuse, it's just what happened. Bad day. Claire repeated the words like she was testing them. You threatened 37 people's livelihoods because you had a bad day? No, I threatened them because I'm used to getting what I want, and your staff was an obstacle to that. The bad day just made me meaner about it. Something flickered in Claire's expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. You're not trying to justify it. Would that change anything? Probably not. But most men in your position would try anyway. Claire stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. I've been Claire the waitress for 6 months. Before that, I was Claire the barista, Claire the bookstore clerk, Claire the museum guide. Do you know how many men like you I've served? How many times I've been talked down to, dismissed, treated like I was stupid or incompetent or just there for decoration? I can imagine. No, you can't, because you've never been on that side of the equation. She turned back to face him. But you're about to be. The room seemed to get colder. What do you mean? Ethan asked. Claire walked back to the table and pulled out a folder that had been sitting on the empty chair beside her. She opened it and spread documents across the table between them. These are the debt instruments connected to your Hudson Yards project, the one you've been working on for 18 months, the billion-dollar development that's supposed to be your masterpiece. Ethan's stomach dropped. How did you get those? I bought them 3 hours ago. All of them. Claire's voice was perfectly calm, like she was discussing the weather. Your primary lender, the backup financing, the bridge loans, everything. It's all mine now. That's impossible. Those loans are held by institutional investors. They wouldn't sell to a random buyer. They would if the random buyer offered 30% above market rate and closed same day. Claire sat down and picked up her wine glass. Money talks, Mr. Calloway. You know that better than anyone. Ethan's mind was racing through the implications. If Claire owned his debt, she could call it due immediately. The project wasn't generating revenue yet, wouldn't for another 8 months at minimum. If she forced him into default, he'd lose everything. Not just the Hudson Yards development, but the collateral he'd put up against it. Property, assets, equity stakes in a dozen other ventures. His entire empire, gone. Why? The question came out quieter than he intended. Because you need to understand what it feels like to have your future in someone else's hands. To know that with one phone call, one decision, one bad day, everything you've built could disappear. Claire set her glass down. That's what you did to my staff last night. You made them feel that fear, and now you're feeling it too. Ethan's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the table to hide it, but Claire noticed anyway. Her expression didn't change. Are you going to destroy me? Ethan asked. I don't know yet. That depends on what happens next. What do you want? Money? An apology? I'll do whatever. Stop. Claire's voice cut through his panic like a blade. Don't grovel. It's undignified, and I don't want it. Then what do you want? I want you to sit there and think about what you've become. Claire leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. You walked into my restaurant last night like you owned the world. Treated people like they were disposable. Made threats you had no right to make. And you did it because you could. because nobody's ever made you face consequences for that behavior. So this is revenge. This is education. Claire's voice softened slightly. My grandfather used to say that power reveals character. When you have enough of it, you can finally be exactly who you are without pretending. Last night you showed me who you are, Mr. Calloway, and I didn't like what I saw. Ethan felt something break inside him. Not dramatically, not all at once, but like a crack spreading through ice. You're right. I know I'm right. The question is whether you know it. I do. The words felt like they were being dragged out of him. I've known for a while that I've turned into someone I don't recognize. I just didn't care enough to change. Why not? Because changing is hard, and being ruthless is easy. Because my wife died, and my daughter barely knows me, and it's easier to be cruel to strangers than to face what I've lost. Ethan looked up and met Claire's eyes. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm just answering your question. Claire studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. James, it's Claire. Yes, I need you to draft a document. I'm restructuring the terms on the Calloway debt instruments. She paused, listening. No, I'm not calling them due. I'm extending the timeline and reducing the interest rate to prime +1. Yes, I'm serious. Have it ready by tomorrow morning. She hung up and looked at Ethan, who was staring at her like she'd just spoken another language. I'm not going to destroy you, Mr. Calloway, but I'm not going to sell you my building either. Not yet. I don't understand. I'm giving you a chance to prove you can be better than you were last night. Your debt is restructured. You'll have more time and better terms. But there's a condition. What condition? Claire pulled out another document and slid it across the table. You're going to work here, at the Velvet Room, as a waiter. 3 shifts a week for the next 3 months. Ethan stared at the paper like it might bite him. You can't be serious. Completely serious. You want to understand why buying this building and firing everyone was wrong? Experience what they experience. Serve the kind of people you were last night. Learn what it feels like to be on the other side of that dynamic. That's insane. I run a billion-dollar company. I can't just... You can, and you will, or I call the debt due tomorrow, and you lose everything. Claire's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Your choice, Mr. Calloway. Ethan looked at the document. It was a contract, professionally drafted, outlining exactly what Claire had just described. 3 shifts per week, minimum 4 hours each, standard waitstaff duties, and compensation. And if I do this, if I fulfill this ridiculous requirement, then at the end of 3 months, we'll talk about the building sale again, and your debt stays restructured regardless of what I decide about the property. That's it? I wait tables for 3 months and my entire company is safe? That's it. Claire picked up her wine glass. Unless you can't handle it. In which case, I'll know you're exactly the person I thought you were, and we'll have nothing more to discuss. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to call his lawyers, find a loophole, fight this insane proposal with every resource he had. But he was tired of fighting, tired of being the person who destroyed things because he could, tired of seeing his wife's disappointment in his dreams. Fine. He picked up the pen Claire had left on the table. I'll do it. You're sure? Because once you sign that, you're committed. I have lawyers who will make your life very difficult if you try to back out. I'm sure. Ethan signed the contract with a signature that had sealed $100 million deals and changed the Manhattan skyline. This time it just made him a waiter. Claire took the document and tucked it into her folder. Your first shift is tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Wear comfortable shoes. Is there anything else, or are you finished humiliating me? This isn't humiliation, Mr. Calloway. This is opportunity. Claire stood up and extended her hand. I'm giving you a chance to become the person you used to be before grief and ambition turned you into someone your daughter will grow up resenting. The mention of Sophie hit like a punch to the chest. How do you know about my daughter? The same way you found out about me. Research. Claire's expression softened slightly. I lost my parents when I was 3. Grew up with a grandfather who loved me but was gone more than he was present. I know what it's like to be the child of someone too consumed by their own pain to fully show up. Don't let Sophie inherit that. Ethan shook her hand, feeling the strength in her grip. I underestimated you. Most people do. That's why the Waitress Act works so well. Claire smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. See you tomorrow, Mr. Calloway. Try not to spill anything. She walked away, leaving Ethan alone at the table with an empty wine glass and the strangest contract he'd ever signed. He sat there for a long time after she left, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of 24 hours, he'd gone from predator to prey, from powerful to powerless, from the man who made threats to the man living under one. And somehow, he didn't feel angry about it. He felt something closer to relief. The drive home was quiet. Ethan's driver knew better than to make conversation when his boss looked like he'd been through a war, so they rode in silence through the Manhattan streets until they pulled up to the house. Sophie was asleep again. Of course she was. It was almost 11 p.m. But this time, Mrs. Chen was waiting in the living room with her arms crossed and an expression that promised a conversation Ethan couldn't escape. "Where were you?" "Business meeting." "Try again?" Ethan sighed and collapsed onto the couch across from her. "I signed a contract that requires me to work as a waiter 3 nights a week for the next 3 months." Mrs. Chen's expression didn't change. "Why?" "Because a billionaire I humiliated decided to teach me a lesson about power and consequences, and the alternative was losing my entire company." "Good for her. You're not surprised?" "Mr. Calloway, I've been telling you for 2 years that you've turned into someone your wife wouldn't recognize. Maybe getting knocked down a few levels will remind you what it's like to be human." Mrs. Chen stood up. "When do you start?" "Tomorrow night." "Then you'd better get some sleep. Waiting tables is harder than you think." She paused at the doorway. "And maybe while you're serving other people, you'll remember to serve the little girl upstairs who keeps waiting for a father who never comes home." She left before Ethan could respond. He sat alone in the dark living room, listening to the house settle around him. Somewhere upstairs, Sophie was dreaming. Somewhere in Manhattan, Claire Bennett was probably reviewing contracts and managing an empire he'd never known existed. And somewhere inside himself, Ethan felt the first small crack of something that might eventually become change. He went upstairs and stood in Sophie's doorway again, watching her sleep. Tomorrow, he'd put on a waiter's uniform and serve people who would treat him the way he'd treated Claire. Tomorrow, he'd learn what it felt like to be invisible, disposable, forgotten. Tomorrow, his whole world would shift. But tonight, he was still a father standing in his daughter's doorway, trying to remember when he'd stopped being the man his wife had loved. "I'm going to fix this," he whispered to the sleeping child who couldn't hear him. "I don't know how yet, but I'm going to fix it." Sophie stirred slightly, clutching her elephant tighter, and Ethan closed the door as quietly as he could. He didn't sleep that night, just sat in his office, staring at the city and thinking about Claire's words. Power reveals character. For years, Ethan had convinced himself that his ruthlessness was strength, that crushing others was survival, that sentiment was weakness and kindness was something you couldn't afford if you wanted to win. But sitting in the dark, facing the reality of what he'd become, he realized he'd gotten it backwards. Power hadn't revealed his character. It had hidden it, buried it under layers of defense mechanisms and emotional scar tissue until he'd forgotten there was anything underneath. Claire Bennett, the shy waitress with trembling hands who turned out to be a billionaire with steel in her spine, had seen through all of it in one night, and instead of destroying him, she'd given him a chance to find himself again. Ethan didn't know if he deserved it. Didn't know if 3 months of waiting tables would actually change anything fundamental about who he'd become. But he was going to find out. At 5 a.m., he went for a run through Central Park, something he hadn't done in months. The city was just waking up, delivery trucks making rounds, early commuters heading to jobs, people walking dogs and living ordinary lives that had nothing to do with billion-dollar deals and corporate warfare. Ethan ran until his lungs burned and his legs ached, trying to outrun the thoughts that had been chasing him for years. He couldn't. But for the first time in a long time, he stopped trying to. When he got home, Sophie was awake and eating cereal at the kitchen counter while Mrs. Chen packed her school lunch. "Daddy!" Her face lit up when she saw him, and the pure joy in that expression made Ethan's chest hurt. "You're home." "I am." He kissed the top of her head, smelling the strawberry shampoo Mrs. Chen used. "How's my girl?" "Good. We're learning about butterflies in science. Did you know they taste with their feet?" "I didn't know that." "It's true. Mrs. Rodriguez showed us pictures." Sophie kicked her legs against the counter stool, full of energy that Ethan barely remembered having. "Are you going to have breakfast with me?" Ethan looked at his watch. He had a 7 a.m. call with the Tokyo office that he absolutely couldn't miss. Or could he? Yeah. He pulled out the stool next to her. I'm going to have breakfast with you. Mrs. Chen nearly dropped the lunchbox. Sophie's smile could have powered the whole city. They ate cereal together and talked about butterflies and school and the drawing Sophie wanted to make for her teacher. Ethan's phone buzzed 6 times with increasingly urgent messages from his assistant, and he ignored every single one. When the school bus came, Sophie hugged him tight. Will you be home for dinner? I have to work tonight, but I'll try to be home before you go to bed. Promise? Ethan thought about the contract he'd signed, the shift starting at 6 p.m., the complete disruption of his carefully controlled schedule. I promise. Sophie ran to catch the bus, her backpack bouncing, and Ethan watched until she disappeared around the corner. That was good, Mrs. Chen said from behind him. Do it again tomorrow. I will. And he meant it. The office was chaos when he arrived. Jennifer met him at the elevator with a tablet full of missed calls and scheduling conflicts. The Tokyo call, reschedule it. The Henderson meeting, push it to next week. Ethan, I can't just... Yes, you can. I'm restructuring my schedule for the next 3 months. Block out 6 p.m. to midnight every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Non-negotiable. Jennifer stared at him like he'd grown a second head. What's happening during those times? I'm working another job. You're what? You heard me? Make it work, Jennifer. That's what I pay you for. He walked into his office and closed the door before she could ask more questions. David called 30 seconds later. Did you sign that insane contract? I did. Ethan, we can fight this, get our own lawyers involved, argue coercion, find some kind of... No. No? I signed it voluntarily. I'm going to honor it. Ethan sat down at his desk and started sorting through the mountain of work that had accumulated overnight. And you're going to support that decision, or I'll find a CFO who will. Silence on the other end. Then, you're serious about this? Completely. Okay. David's voice changed, became more thoughtful. Then I guess I'll see you at the restaurant. Someone needs to make sure you don't poison anybody. You're not coming to watch me wait tables. The hell I'm not. I've been working for you for 6 years, and you've been a nightmare for at least 4 of them. I want to see this. Ethan almost smiled. Bring Marcus and Richard too. Make it a show. You're enjoying this. I'm terrified. But yeah, maybe a little. Ethan looked out his window at the city that he'd spent a decade trying to conquer. I'll talk to you later, David. He hung up and got to work, plowing through contracts and emails and conference calls with the kind of focused intensity that had built his empire. But in the back of his mind, a clock was ticking down to 6 p.m. To the moment when Ethan Callaway, billionaire real estate mogul, would put on a waiter's uniform and learn what it felt like to serve instead of being served. He was terrified. He was curious. And for the first time in 5 years, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he was moving in the right direction. The uniform fit better than Ethan expected, which somehow made everything worse. He stood in the restaurant's staff bathroom at 5:47 p.m., staring at his reflection like it belonged to someone else. Black slacks, white button-down shirt, black vest, and a name tag that said Ethan in letters that felt like they were mocking him. His $2,000 watch looked ridiculous against the sleeves, so he'd taken it off and stuffed it in his jacket pocket. The jacket that was currently hanging in a locker next to aprons that smelled like kitchen grease and someone's forgotten lunch. You look like you're about to throw up. Claire appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with her arms crossed. She was wearing the same waitress uniform, though hers looked somehow more natural, like she'd been born knowing how to blend in. I'm fine. Liar. She walked in and adjusted his vest, which he'd buttoned wrong. First shift jitters are normal. Everyone gets them. I run a billion-dollar company. I've presented to hostile boards and negotiated with people who would happily see me destroyed. I don't get jitters. And yet your hands are shaking. Claire finished with the vest and stepped back. It's okay to be nervous, Ethan. You're about to do something you've never done before, in front of people who know exactly who you are. That's terrifying. You're enjoying this way too much. Maybe a little. Her smile was sharp but not unkind. Come on, Ramon wants to meet you before the dinner rush starts. Ramon Gutierrez ran the kitchen like a general commanding troops, and he had the scars to prove it. Burn marks up both forearms, a missing fingertip on his left hand, and eyes that had seen every kind of restaurant disaster and lived to tell about it. He was somewhere in his 50s, built like someone who'd spent decades lifting heavy pots and breaking down beef sides. And when he looked at Ethan, there was absolutely zero recognition of the billionaire who'd threatened his job 2 nights ago. Just assessment of another new hire who probably wouldn't last a week. You ever worked food service before? Ramon's voice had the kind of rough edge that came from years of yelling over kitchen noise. No. Ever carried a full tray? No. You know the difference between a soup spoon and a dessert fork? Vaguely, Ramon looked at Claire. You're seriously making me train this guy? He signed a contract. Claire pulled out her phone and showed Ramon something that made his eyebrows climb toward his hairline. No shit. Okay then. Ramon turned back to Ethan with a grin that suggested the next few hours were going to be educational in the worst possible way. First rule. The customer is not always right, but you're going to act like they are anyway. Second rule. If you drop something, keep moving. Third rule. Stay out of my kitchen unless you're picking up an order. Got it? Got it. Good. Maria's going to shadow you tonight. Try not to embarrass yourself too badly. Maria Sandoval was 23, finishing her master's in economics at NYU, and had been working at the Velvet Room for 2 years to pay for school. She took one look at Ethan and sighed like someone who'd just been assigned a group project with the kid who never did homework. Okay, so basics. You approach from the left, serve from the right, never reach across a guest. Always check if they have dietary restrictions before reciting specials. And for the love of everything, do not flirt with customers even if they flirt with you first. I'm not going to flirt with anyone. Sure, that's what the last guy said. And then he got slapped by a customer's wife, and we had to comp their whole meal. Maria grabbed a tray and demonstrated the proper way to hold it, balanced on her left palm, fingers spread, right hand free for stability. Your turn. Ethan copied her position. The tray was heavier than it looked, and his shoulders started aching within 30 seconds. You're gripping too hard. Relax your hand. Maria adjusted his fingers. There. Now walk to the end of the hall and back without dropping it. He made it 6 steps before the tray started wobbling. Adjust with your body, not your hand. Shift your weight. Maria watched him struggle for another few steps before taking the tray back. We're going to need to practice this more. A lot more. The next hour was a crash course in everything Ethan had never thought about when dining at expensive restaurants. How to properly set a table. The difference between water glasses and wine glasses, and which went where. How to carry multiple plates without burning himself or dropping everything. The exact phrasing to use when greeting a table, taking an order, delivering food, clearing dishes. It was information overload, and Ethan's brain kept trying to file it all away the same way he processed business data. But this wasn't spreadsheets and profit margins. This was muscle memory and timing and reading people's body language to know if they needed water refills or wanted to be left alone. You're overthinking it, Maria said after he fumbled through reciting the specials for the 3rd time. Just talk to them like they're human beings. Rich people aren't aliens, even though they sometimes act like it. I am a rich person. Yeah, well, tonight you're a waiter. So put on your human being face and let's go. She checked her watch. Doors open in 10 minutes. First tables will be seated in 15. You ready? No. Good. Neither was I my first night. Let's see if you survive. The dining room filled slowly at first, then all at once. Couples celebrating anniversaries. Business dinners that looked exactly like the one Ethan had attended 2 nights ago. A family with 2 young kids who immediately started coloring on the tablecloths with crayons their mother had brought. Maria assigned Ethan to section 3, 4 tables, manageable for a first night. His first customers were an older couple who smiled politely and ordered glasses of Chardonnay without looking at him twice. Easy. He could do this. He put the order into the computer system, which took 3 tries because he kept hitting the wrong buttons, and went to get their drinks from the bar. Heard you're the new guy. The bartender was a woman in her 40s with sleeve tattoos and the kind of efficient movements that came from making thousands of drinks. Maya, try not to spill anything on your first night. Everyone keeps saying that like I'm going to destroy the place. First-timers usually do. It's tradition. She poured the wine with practiced precision and set both glasses on his tray. Good luck. Ethan carried the tray back to the table, moving carefully, and trying to remember everything Maria had taught him about balance and weight distribution. He made it 3/4 of the way across the dining room before someone stepped backward from another table directly into his path. He swerved. The tray wobbled. One wine glass tilted dangerously close to the edge, and somehow, miraculously, nothing fell. Nice save. Maria appeared at his elbow. But next time, say behind you when you're walking through the dining room. People don't have eyes in the back of their heads. Ethan delivered the wine without further incident, took the couple's food order, salmon for her, steak medium rare for him, and headed back to put it in. Then his second table got seated. David, Marcus, and Richard walked in wearing shit-eating grins and sat down in the exact center of Ethan's section. You have got to be kidding me. Ethan stopped dead in the middle of the dining room. Maria followed his gaze. You know them? They work for me. Oh, this is going to be fun. She was trying not to smile and failing completely. Remember what Ramon said, customer is always right, even when they're absolutely not. Ethan walked over to their table with all the enthusiasm of someone approaching a firing squad. Gentlemen, Ethan. Marcus was enjoying this way too much. Or should I call you server? Waiter? What's the proper etiquette here? You should call me someone who controls your annual bonus. Ethan pulled out his order pad. What can I get you to drink? Oh, we're doing this properly. David leaned back in his chair, getting comfortable. I'll have a scotch, neat, top shelf. The same. Richard at least looked slightly apologetic. And I'll have Marcus paused dramatically. Actually, what do you recommend? I'm having trouble deciding. I recommend you order quickly before I accidentally drop something on you. Is that any way to treat a customer? Marcus grinned. I'm going to have to speak to your manager about this poor service. The manager is a billionaire who already hates me. You'll get along great. Ethan wrote down their drink orders. Anything else? We need a few minutes with the menu. David was trying to keep a straight face. Take your time. We're in no rush. Ethan walked away before he said something he'd regret, which turned out to be a mistake because his third and fourth tables got seated simultaneously, and suddenly he was taking orders from 6 different groups while trying to remember who wanted sparkling versus still water and which table had the person allergic to shellfish. The next 2 hours became a blur of movement and multitasking and trying not to screw up too badly. He carried trays that made his shoulders burn. He memorized orders and delivered food and cleared dishes and smiled at people who didn't see him as a billionaire or a businessman or anything except the guy bringing their dinner. And it was the most humbling experience of his life. Your steak is overcooked. A woman at table 12 sent her plate back without looking up from her phone. I ordered medium rare. This is medium well. Ethan looked at the steak. It looked perfectly fine to him, but he took it back to the kitchen anyway. Ramon cut into it, examined the inside, and shook his head. That's medium rare. She's full of shit. So what do I do? You smile, apologize, and I'll make her another one exactly the same way. She'll eat it and probably complain about that one too, but that's not your problem. Ramon was already pulling out another steak. Welcome to food service, where the customer is always right even when they're objectively wrong. At table 9, a man snapped his fingers at Ethan to get his attention. Actual finger snapping, like Ethan was a dog. We need more bread. And the butter's too cold. Can't you people do anything right? Ethan felt something dark and familiar rise in his chest, the instinct to snap back, to put this person in their place, to remind them who they were talking to. Then he saw Claire watching from across the dining room, and he swallowed the anger. I'll get that for you right away, sir. See that you do. Ethan walked to the kitchen, got fresh bread and room-temperature butter, and delivered it with a smile that felt like it might crack his face. The man didn't say thank you, just took the bread basket and went back to his conversation. Meanwhile, David's table was deliberately running him ragged. They sent their appetizers back twice. Once because the calamari wasn't crispy enough, once because the soup was too hot. They changed their entree orders 3 times. They asked for water refills every 5 minutes. You guys are enjoying this way too much, Ethan said on his 6th trip to their table. Oh, absolutely. Marcus was having the time of his life. I've been working for you for 4 years, Ethan. 4 years of being yelled at and having my presentations torn apart and being told I'm not working hard enough. This is therapeutic. I'm never going to live this down, am I? Not a chance. David raised his scotch and a mock toast. To new experiences and humility. I hate all of you. That's not very professional customer service, Richard pointed out. We might have to leave a bad review. Ethan walked away before he could respond and nearly collided with another server carrying a tray full of desserts. Behind! Maria appeared and steered him out of the way just in time. You're doing okay for your first night, but you need to pay more attention to your surroundings. This place gets chaotic and people move fast. How do you keep track of everything? Practice. Lots and lots of practice. She glanced at his section. Your two top at table 11 needs their check, and table 12 wants to talk to you about something. Table 12 was the woman with the overcooked steak. Ethan approached cautiously. Yes, ma'am? I wanted to apologize. She wasn't looking at her phone anymore. I was rude earlier about the steak. It's been a rough day and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair. Ethan blinked, completely thrown. Oh, thank you. How long have you been working here? This is my first night. Really? You're doing great. She smiled and it seemed genuine. Keep it up. She left a 30% tip, which Ethan discovered later when he was closing out her check. At table 9, the finger-snapping man left 5% and wrote "slow service" on the receipt in angry capital letters. It was almost 10 p.m. when the dinner rush finally started to slow. Ethan's feet hurt in ways he didn't know feet could hurt. His lower back was screaming from carrying heavy trays, and he'd burned his thumb on a hot plate despite Maya's warnings. But he'd survived. David's table was the last to leave, and they left him a $100 tip with a note that said, "You earned it, boss. How you holding up?" Claire appeared as Ethan was clearing the last of his tables, moving with the practiced exhaustion of someone who'd done this shift 1,000 times. I'm alive. Barely. You did better than I expected. Only dropped one fork, didn't spill anything, and only looked like you wanted to murder someone about 6 or 7 times. She helped him stack plates on his tray. What'd you think? Ethan paused, really considering the question. I thought it was going to be beneath me, like I'd be slumming it, proving a point, and then going back to my real life. He set the last plate on the tray. But it wasn't like that at all. What was it like? Exhausting, humbling, eye-opening. He picked up the tray, his muscles protesting. I've eaten at restaurants like this hundreds of times. Never once thought about what it takes to make the whole thing work. The timing, the coordination, the physical labor, and the way people treat you when they think you're just the help. You mean the way you treated me 2 nights ago? Yeah, like that. Ethan carried the tray to the dish station, where a teenager with headphones was already working through a mountain of plates. I was an asshole. You were, but you showed up tonight, which is more than most people in your position would do. Claire grabbed a rag and started wiping down tables. Want to know a secret? Sure. 3 people recognized you tonight. The couple at table 14, he works in commercial real estate. The woman at table 16, her husband is on the board of directors for one of your competitors. And the business dinner at table 8, they were discussing whether to bid against you on the Brooklyn project. Ethan froze. And they didn't say anything? Why would they? You were their waiter. People don't see wait staff as real people with real lives. We're just part of the scenery. Claire finished the table she was cleaning and moved to the next one. That's the lesson, Ethan. When you have power, you're visible. When you don't, you disappear. And most people in power have no idea what it's like to be invisible. But you do? I've been invisible for 6 years, served thousands of people who never looked at me twice, heard conversations they'd never have if they knew who I was, learned things about human nature that no amount of money could teach. She met his eyes. That's what my grandfather wanted me to understand. Power is an illusion. Humanity is real. The kitchen was winding down. Ramon was breaking down his station while shouting instructions in Spanish to the line cooks. Maya was counting her tips at the bar. Maria was rolling silverware into napkins while talking on her phone. Normal people doing normal work, living normal lives that had nothing to do with boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt like maybe he could be part of something like that. Something real. Same time Wednesday? Claire asked. Yeah, I'll be here. Good. She pulled off her apron and tossed it in the laundry bin. Get some rest. Wednesday's going to be busier. How is that possible? Wine club night. 100-person reservation, half of them already drunk when they arrive, all of them demanding and loud. Claire smiled at his expression. Welcome to the service industry, Ethan. It only gets weirder from here. She left through the back exit, and Ethan found himself alone in the empty dining room, surrounded by clean tables and the smell of lemon cleaner. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Chen, Sophie's asleep, but she waited up as long as she could. She made you a drawing. Guilt and affection twisted together in his chest. He'd missed bedtime again, but this time for a different reason. A better reason, maybe. He changed back into his suit in the staff bathroom, stuffing the uniform into the locker for Wednesday's shift. His reflection looked the same as it had 3 hours ago, but something felt different, smaller, maybe. More human. The drive home took 40 minutes through late-night Manhattan traffic. When Ethan walked through his front door at 11:15, Mrs. Chen was waiting in the kitchen with tea and a knowing expression. How was it? Harder than running a company. Ethan collapsed into a chair. My feet are killing me. That's what happens when you're on them for 6 hours straight. You'll get used to it. She pushed the tea toward him. Sophie's drawing is on the counter. It was another stick figure picture, this one showing Ethan in what was clearly meant to be a waiter's uniform, complete with a tray and what might have been wine glasses. My daddy works hard was written across the top in her careful letters. How did she know? Ethan asked. I told her you took a second job to help people. She was very proud. Mrs. Chen stood up. She wants to come see you work sometime. I told her maybe when she's older. Yeah, maybe. Ethan stared at the drawing, feeling something unfamiliar prickling behind his eyes. Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something? You're going to anyway. Did my wife ever say anything to you about me, about who I was becoming? Mrs. Chen's expression softened. She said you were drowning in your grief, and she didn't know how to reach you, that you'd built walls so high she couldn't find a way in anymore. She paused. She also said that somewhere under all that pain was the man she'd married. She just hoped he'd find his way back before it was too late. I think I'm trying to. Find my way back, I mean. I know. That's why I'm still here. Mrs. Chen picked up her purse. Get some sleep, Mr. Calloway. Tomorrow's going to be busy. Aren't they all? Yes, but tomorrow you have to be a father in the morning and a businessman during the day and a waiter at night. That's a lot of hats to wear. She stopped at the door. Just don't forget which one matters most. After she left, Ethan sat alone in the kitchen with Sophie's drawing and cold tea, thinking about the woman at table 12 who'd apologized, and the man at table 9 who'd snapped his fingers, and David and Marcus and Richard who'd turned his humiliation into a bonding experience. He thought about Claire Bennett, who could have destroyed him but chose education instead. And he thought about his wife, who died believing he was too far gone to save. Maybe she'd been wrong, or maybe she'd just never lived long enough to see him hit bottom and decide to climb back up. Ethan went upstairs and checked on Sophie one more time. She was sprawled across her bed with the stuffed elephant on the floor and her covers kicked off. He tucked her back in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, I love you, to the sleeping child who'd waited up to see him come home. Then he went to his office and did something he hadn't done in months. He opened his email and typed a message to his assistant. Jennifer, effective immediately, I need you to block off 5 to 7 a.m. every morning for the foreseeable future. Personal time, non-negotiable. Also move all my Friday meetings to Thursday when possible. I have a standing commitment on Friday evenings that can't be changed. Thanks, E. He sent it before he could second-guess himself. Then he pulled up the calendar for Sophie's school, the one he'd been ignoring for weeks, and found the parent-teacher conference he'd deleted that morning. He registered for a slot, added it to his calendar with 3 reminder alerts. Small steps, but steps nonetheless. Wednesday's shift was exactly as chaotic as Claire had promised. The wine club descended on the velvet room like a well-dressed tornado, demanding and loud and occasionally handsy in ways that made Ethan want to file harassment complaints on behalf of the entire staff. Just smile and move away, Maria advised after a drunk woman grabbed Ethan's arm and told him he had nice eyes. She's harmless, mostly. This is insane. This is Wednesday. Maria grabbed a tray of wine glasses and headed back into the chaos. Try to keep up. Ethan served 73 people that night, got called sweetheart by a woman old enough to be his grandmother, spilled red wine on his own pants, and discovered that drunk people tipped either incredibly well or incredibly poorly with no middle ground. He made $340 in tips and earned every penny. Friday was quieter, but somehow worse. A family with 3 children under the age of 6 sat in his section and proceeded to destroy everything within reach. Spaghetti on the floor, water spilled across the table, crayons everywhere, and parents who seemed genuinely surprised that their children were causing chaos. "I'm so sorry," the mother said for the 15th time as Ethan cleaned up another mess. "They're usually better behaved." "It's fine." Ethan forced a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "Kids will be kids." He thought about Sophie and wondered if he'd ever been one of those oblivious parents who let their child run wild while service staff cleaned up the damage. Probably. Almost definitely. The father left a 25% tip and an apologetic note, which made the chaos slightly more bearable. Between tables, Ethan caught glimpses of Claire moving through the dining room with practiced ease. She worked fewer shifts now, mostly just observing, managing, making sure everything ran smoothly. But occasionally she'd jump in to help during rush periods, carrying trays and taking orders like it was second nature. She never acknowledged him during service, never gave him special treatment or made it obvious they had history. To anyone watching, she was just another server and he was just another new hire trying to figure out which fork went where. But sometimes Ethan would catch her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Assessment, maybe. Or curiosity about whether this experiment of hers was actually working. After Friday's shift, Ramon called Ethan into the kitchen. "You're not terrible." Ramon said it like he was announcing a death sentence. "Still slow on the pickup, still forgetting to say behind, still holding the tray wrong about 50% of the time. But you're trying. That counts for something." High praise. Don't let it go to your head. Ramon pulled out a beer from the walk-in and tossed one to Ethan. "You want to know the truth? I didn't think you'd last 2 shifts. Thought you'd quit or throw a tantrum or get yourself fired within a week." "Still time for that." "Yeah, but you won't." Ramon opened his beer. "You've got that look people get when they're trying to prove something to themselves. Seen it before. Usually means they stick around longer than expected." "What am I trying to prove?" "Hell if I know. That's between you and whatever demons you're running from." Ramon took a long drink. "Just don't bring that drama into my kitchen. I've got enough problems without billionaires having existential crises near my ovens." Ethan laughed, actual laughter that felt rusty from disuse. "Deal." He drove home that night with aching feet and the smell of kitchen grease in his hair, and for the first time in years, he felt like maybe he'd actually accomplished something real. Not closed a deal, not crushed a competitor, not added another zero to his net worth. Just survived 3 shifts without completely destroying his dignity, and learned a little bit more about what it meant to be human. Sophie was still awake when he got home, sitting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Chen and working on homework that looked like basic multiplication. "Daddy!" She jumped up and ran to hug him. "You smell funny." "That's restaurant smell. Kitchen grease and people's cologne all mixed together." "It's gross," but she hugged him anyway. "Did you have a good day at your new job?" "It was challenging, but good." Ethan sat down across from her. "What are you working on?" "Math. I hate math." "Math is useful. Helps you figure out things like how many plates you can carry at once, or how to split a tip between 5 servers." Sophie wrinkled her nose. "That's boring math. I want fun math." "There's no such thing as fun math," Mrs. Chen snorted, says the man who built a career on financial projections. They worked on homework together until Sophie's eyes started drooping, and then Ethan carried her upstairs and tucked her into bed properly this time, not just standing in the doorway watching her sleep. "Will you be here for breakfast tomorrow?" Sophie asked, half asleep. "I will. I cleared my whole morning." "Promise?" "Promise." And when he woke up at 6 a.m. on Saturday, Ethan kept that promise. They made pancakes together, badly, because neither of them knew what they were doing, and ate them while watching cartoons that made absolutely no sense to Ethan, but made Sophie laugh until she snorted. His phone buzzed approximately 60 times with work emergencies that Jennifer handled without him. He ignored them all. The weeks blurred together in ways Ethan's old life never had. Before, time had moved in quarterly reports and fiscal deadlines and project milestones. Now it moved in shifts and tips and the rhythm of dinner rushes that started at 7 and ended around 10. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. 6 hours each. 18 hours a week of being nobody special. It should have felt like a waste of time. a punishment he was enduring until Claire decided he'd learned his lesson and released him back to his real life. Instead, it felt like the only hours of his week that actually mattered. By the end of the second week, Ethan could carry 3 plates at once without dropping them. By the third week, he'd memorized the menu well enough to make recommendations without sounding like he was reading a script. By week 4, he stopped flinching when people snapped their fingers at him. "You're getting good at this," Maria said on a Friday night in early November, watching Ethan navigate a packed dining room with a tray of entrees balanced perfectly on his left palm. "Like, actually good. Not just good for a beginner good." "Don't sound so surprised." "I am surprised. Most people who do this job because they have to still hate it after months. You look like you're almost enjoying yourself." Ethan set down the tray and started distributing plates to table 7. "I wouldn't say enjoying, but it's not horrible." High praise from someone who probably considered manual labor beneath him 6 weeks ago. "I absolutely did. Turns out I was an idiot." The woman at table 7, a regular named Patricia, who came in every Friday with her book club, smiled up at him. "The salmon looks beautiful, Ethan. You always remember to ask for extra lemon. I appreciate that." "Of course, Mrs. Patterson. Enjoy your meal." After he walked away, Maria elbowed him. "See? People remember when you pay attention. That's the difference between good service and great service." "I thought great service was just bringing food without spilling it. That's basic competence. Great service is remembering Mrs. Patterson likes extra lemon and that the guy at table 12 always orders his steak well done even though it makes Ramon want to quit, and that the couple at table 9 are celebrating their anniversary, so you should tell Maya to send them a free dessert." Ethan looked at table 9, where a man and woman in their 60s were holding hands across the table and looking at each other like they were the only people in the room. Something twisted in his chest, memory and loss and the ghost of what he'd had with his wife before cancer took it away. "How do you know it's their anniversary?" "Because they've been coming here on the same day every year for the last decade. November 8th, 42 years married." Maria grabbed her own tray. "Pay attention to people, Ethan. Actually see them instead of just looking through them. That's the whole point of this, isn't it?" She was right, and they both knew it. Ethan put in a note for the anniversary couple to get complimentary champagne and dessert. When he delivered it later, the woman's eyes got watery and the man shook his hand with genuine gratitude that felt more valuable than any business deal Ethan had closed in the last year. Claire watched the whole thing from across the dining room, and when Ethan caught her eye, she gave him the smallest nod of approval. It shouldn't have felt like winning, but somehow it did. The following Monday, Ethan showed up for his shift to find the restaurant in chaos. One of the other servers had called out sick, another was dealing with a family emergency, and they were short-staffed on a night when they had 2 large party reservations and a proposal planned for table 15. "I need you to take 8 tables tonight instead of 4. Ramon said it like he was asking Ethan to perform surgery. "I know that's a lot for someone who's only been here 6 weeks, but we're desperate." "I can handle it." "You sure? Because if you crash and burn, the whole night crashes with you." "I'm sure." Ramon studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, but if you start drowning, tell Maria. Pride's not worth destroying the whole service." 8 tables meant 16 people minimum, probably closer to 25 with the larger parties. It meant constant movement, split-second timing, and 0 room for error. Ethan had run board meetings with hostile investors, negotiated deals with people who wanted to destroy him, and presented quarterly reports to rooms full of skeptical shareholders. This was harder. Table 3 needed wine recommendations. Table 5 had dietary restrictions that required a trip to the kitchen to consult with Ramon. Table 8 was the proposal, a nervous 20-something guy who kept checking his pocket where the ring was hidden and looking like he might throw up. "First proposal?" Ethan asked while taking their drink order. "That obvious?" "You look terrified. It's sweet." Ethan glanced at the girlfriend, who was studying the menu and completely oblivious. "You want me to bring the ring out with dessert? Hidden in something?" The guy's eyes lit up. "Could you?" "I'll talk to Ramon. We'll make it special." Between managing his own tables, Ethan coordinated with Ramon on the proposal setup, a chocolate lava cake with the ring balanced on top, surrounded by raspberry coulis arranged in a heart shape because Ramon was secretly a romantic despite his tough exterior. "You tell anyone I did this and I'll deny it," Ramon muttered while plating the dessert with the kind of precision usually reserved for Michelin star restaurants. Your secret's safe with me. The proposal happened at 9:47 p.m. The girlfriend cried, said yes, and the whole restaurant applauded. The guy shook Ethan's hand so hard it hurt, and left a tip that was probably more than he could afford, but felt appropriate for the moment. Ethan cleared their table with something warm and unfamiliar sitting in his chest. He'd helped facilitate that, had been part of a moment these two people would remember for the rest of their lives. When was the last time he'd done something that actually mattered to someone? Good work tonight. Claire appeared as Ethan was cashing out his tips at the end of the shift. 8 tables, no disasters, and you made a guy's proposal perfect. I'm impressed. Don't be. I was barely holding it together. Nobody could tell. That's what matters. She leaned against the bar where Maya was wiping down glasses. How are you feeling, honestly? Ethan counted his tips. $410 for the night, his best so far. Exhausted. My feet hurt, my back hurts, and I'm pretty sure I pulled something in my shoulder carrying that tray of steaks to table 6. That's not what I meant. I know. Ethan pocketed the cash. You want to know if I've learned my lesson yet? If I've suffered enough to earn your forgiveness? I want to know if you understand why I'm doing this. You're teaching me empathy, showing me what it's like to be powerless, so I'll think twice before wielding power against people who can't fight back. Ethan met her eyes. And it's working. I get it now. Do you? Claire's expression was hard to read. Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear? 6 weeks ago, I would have said whatever you wanted to hear if it got me what I wanted. But that's not who I'm trying to be anymore. Ethan pulled off his vest, suddenly too tired to keep up the careful distance they maintained during shifts. You were right about me, Claire. I'd turned into someone cruel and hollow, someone who treated people like obstacles instead of humans. And I didn't even realize it until you held up a mirror and made me look. And now that you've looked, now I'm trying to figure out how to be different, how to rebuild myself into someone my daughter won't grow up resenting and my wife wouldn't have been ashamed of. He paused. I don't know if 3 months of waiting tables is enough to fix what's broken, but it's a start. Claire was quiet for a moment, studying him with those sharp eyes that had seen through his arrogance from the beginning. You mentioned your wife. You don't talk about her much, because it hurts, and I'm not good at dealing with things that hurt. What was she like? Ethan wasn't expecting the question, and for a second he considered deflecting, changing the subject, maintaining the walls he'd built around that particular pain. But he was tired of walls. She was kind, genuinely kind, not performatively kind like people are at charity galas. She saw the best in everyone, including me, even when I didn't deserve it. The words came slowly, rusty from years of avoidance. She made me laugh, made me want to be better, and when she got sick I watched her fight with everything she had, and it still wasn't enough. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't change anything. Ethan grabbed his jacket from the back. After she died, I threw myself into work because it was the only thing that didn't remind me of what I'd lost. Built bigger, bought more, crushed anyone who got in my way. Told myself I was providing for Sophie, securing our future. But really, I was just running. Running from what? The fact that I'm alone. That Sophie's growing up without a mother and with a father who's barely present. That I failed the one person who believed I could be something more than just another rich asshole. Ethan's voice cracked slightly. Your grandfather made you work regular jobs to understand people. My wife tried to teach me the same thing just by being herself, but I was too stubborn to listen until she wasn't there anymore. Claire's expression softened in a way Ethan had never seen during their carefully professional interactions at the restaurant. She sounds remarkable. She was. And I wasted years of our marriage being the person I thought I needed to be, instead of the person she needed me to be. Ethan looked down at his hands. They were rough now, calloused from weeks of manual labor, in ways they'd never been from signing contracts. I can't fix that. Can't get that time back. But maybe I can make sure Sophie doesn't lose her father the same way. Is that why you kept your promise about breakfast with her? Why you started showing up to her school events? Ethan's head snapped up. How do you know about that? I pay attention. It's kind of my thing. Claire's smile was slight but genuine. Mrs. Chen mentioned it when she came in for lunch last week. Said you've been having breakfast with Sophie every morning for 6 weeks straight. Haven't missed a single day. Mrs. Chen was here? She wanted to see where you were working. Make sure I wasn't torturing you too badly. Claire pushed off from the bar. She also said Sophie's teacher told her you were the most engaged parent at the last conference, asked actual questions, stayed the whole time, volunteered to help with the class trip to the museum. It's not that impressive. It's basic parenting. It's impressive for you. 6 weeks ago, you couldn't be bothered to respond to your daughter's school emails. Now you're volunteering for field trips. Claire grabbed her own jacket. That's growth, Ethan. Real growth. They walked out together into the November night. The air was cold enough to see their breath, and the city was doing that thing where it looked almost clean after the rain, all reflected lights and wet pavement. Can I ask you something? Ethan said as they stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant. Sure. Why didn't you just destroy me? You had every reason to. I humiliated you, threatened your employees, and walked into your restaurant acting like I owned the place. You could have called my debt due, tanked my company, and been completely justified. So why this? Why give me a chance to change? Claire was quiet for a moment, watching a taxi splash through a puddle at the intersection. Because my grandfather believed that people were worth saving, that everyone had the capacity to be better if given the right motivation. She turned to look at Ethan, and because I saw something in you that night, under all the arrogance and cruelty, there was someone drowning, someone in pain who'd forgotten how to ask for help. That's generous. It's honest. I've met plenty of genuinely terrible people in my life, Ethan. You're not one of them. You were just lost. She pulled her jacket tighter against the cold. Still are, a little bit. But you're finding your way back. With your very specific brand of tough love. Someone had to knock you off your pedestal. Might as well be the waitress you underestimated. Claire started walking toward the subway station, then stopped and turned back. Same time Wednesday? I'll be here. Good, because we're hosting a corporate event Wednesday night. 150 people, past appetizers, open bar. It's going to be chaos. You're sadistic. I prefer educational. See you Wednesday, Ethan. She disappeared into the subway, leaving Ethan standing on the street corner wondering how a woman he'd known for less than 2 months had managed to reshape his entire understanding of who he was and who he wanted to be. His phone buzzed. Sophie texting from Mrs. Chen's phone because she wasn't allowed her own yet. Did you have a good day at work? I love you, Daddy. Ethan typed back. Best day? Love you too. See you for breakfast. The parent-teacher conference that week revealed Sophie was thriving. Her grades were good, she had friends, and according to Mrs. Rodriguez, she'd been noticeably happier in the last month. Whatever you're doing at home, keep doing it, Mrs. Rodriguez said while showing Ethan Sophie's latest art project, a family portrait that actually included him this time, standing next to Sophie with both of them smiling. She talks about you constantly now, your breakfast together, the homework help, how you taught her about fractions using pizza slices. I've been trying to be more present. It shows, and it matters. Mrs. Rodriguez pulled out another folder. We're doing a Thanksgiving project where kids interview a family member about what they're grateful for. Sophie chose you. I hope that's okay. Of course it's okay. That night at dinner, actual dinner, at an actual table, not Ethan eating alone in his office at midnight, Sophie asked her interview questions with the seriousness of a professional journalist. What are you grateful for, Daddy? Ethan thought about the question while cutting his chicken into smaller pieces. 6 weeks ago, he would have said his company, his success, his ability to provide. I'm grateful for you. For Mrs. Chen putting up with me. For second chances and people who believe I can be better than I've been. He looked at his daughter, who was writing his answers in careful cursive. And for breakfast, I really like our breakfast. Sophie beamed. Me too. Can we have pancakes again tomorrow? We can have pancakes every day if you want. Mrs. Chen says too many pancakes will make us fat. Mrs. Chen appeared from the kitchen with more vegetables. I said too many pancakes without vegetables will make you unhealthy. There's a difference. Vegetables are gross. So is scurvy. Eat your broccoli. It was the most normal family dinner Ethan had experienced in years. And when it was over, he helped Sophie with her homework and read her 2 chapters of the book they were working through together before bed. Daddy? Sophie asked as he was turning off her light. Yeah? Are you happy now? The question hit harder than it should have. What makes you ask that? You smile more, and you don't look so tired all the time. Mrs. Chen says you found something you were missing. Sophie clutched her elephant. Did you? Ethan sat back down on the edge of her bed. I think maybe I did, or I'm starting to find it anyway. Was it lost for a long time? Yeah, sweetheart. It was lost for a long time. I'm glad you found it, Sophie yawned. I like it when you're home. Me too. He stayed until she fell asleep, watching her breathe and feeling the weight of everything he'd almost lost through his own stubbornness and grief. Wednesday's corporate event was exactly as chaotic as Claire had promised. A tech company celebrating some kind of product launch, all open bar and passed appetizers, and people who'd clearly started drinking before they arrived. Ethan spent 6 hours carrying trays of canapes through crowds of increasingly drunk professionals, deflecting inappropriate comments and trying not to drop anything when someone inevitably bumped into him. Having fun yet? Maria asked during a rare quiet moment in the kitchen. This is a nightmare. This is Wednesday. Try to keep perspective. She loaded her tray with more appetizers. At least the tips will be good. Tech people tip well when they're drunk. She was right. Ethan made $520 that night, his best haul yet. But he earned every penny dodging grabby hands and listening to slurred conversations about stock options and IPOs and workplace politics that sounded exactly like the conversations he'd had at similar events for years. The difference was that now he was invisible, just the help. Someone these people would never remember the next morning. How does it feel? Claire asked at the end of the night while they were cleaning up. The tech people had finally left around midnight, leaving behind a mess of empty glasses and dropped appetizers and general chaos. How does what feel? Being on this side of that kind of event, you've been to hundreds of them, I'm sure. Corporate celebrations, product launches, industry parties. Yeah, but I was never the one cleaning up afterward. Ethan picked up abandoned wine glasses from a table. It feels wrong. All that excess, all that waste, while people are working their asses off just to make it happen and nobody even notices. Now you're getting it. Claire wiped down a table. That's the invisible labor that makes your world possible, Ethan, and most people in your position never think about it. I didn't, not until you made me live it. They worked in silence for a while, restoring order to the chaos. The rest of the staff had left, just Ethan and Claire and the night cleaning crew working in the background. Can I tell you something? Claire said eventually. Sure. When I first decided to do this, make you work here, I thought it was about revenge. Making you feel what I felt when you humiliated me, watching you struggle and fail and maybe learn a lesson in the process. She set down her cleaning rag. But somewhere along the way it stopped being about revenge and started being about something else. What? Hope. That people can actually change. That power and privilege don't have to corrupt everyone they touch. That someone like you could become someone better. Claire met his eyes. You're proving that hope wasn't misplaced. Don't give me too much credit yet. I still have moments where I want to snap at people or remind them who I am or fall back into old patterns. That's normal. Growth isn't linear. She grabbed her coat from the back. But you keep showing up, Ethan. That matters more than perfection. Speaking of showing up, what happens after 3 months, when the contract period ends? Claire paused, her hand on her coat. I don't know yet. That depends on a lot of things. Like what? Like whether you've actually changed or just learned to fake it convincingly. Like whether I believe you'll maintain this growth without the threat of financial ruin hanging over you. Like whether you've proven you deserve a second chance with my building. She pulled on her coat. We still have 5 weeks to figure it out. And if you decide I haven't changed enough, that I don't deserve that second chance, then you walk away with your debt restructured and your company intact, but without the property you wanted, and I find someone else to buy it. Someone who will treat the staff like humans instead of obstacles. That's fair. I'm always fair, Ethan. That's the difference between us. Claire headed toward the door, then stopped. Same time Friday? I'll be here. After she left, Ethan stood alone in the empty restaurant, surrounded by clean tables and the smell of floor cleaner, thinking about hope and change and whether he'd actually become a better person or just gotten better at playing the part. The honest answer was he didn't know yet. But he was trying, and maybe that was enough for now. The following Monday, Ethan arrived at work to find a new hire in training, a kid named James who couldn't have been more than 22 and looked absolutely terrified. You're shadowing Ethan tonight, Ramon told James, who went even paler. He's been here about 7 weeks, so he's past the worst of the learning curve. Pay attention to what he does. I'm training someone, Ethan said. I barely know what I'm doing myself. You know enough. And teaching someone else will help cement what you've learned. Ramon turned back to James. Don't let him scare you. He's actually decent at this job, even though he's rich enough to buy this whole building 10 times over. James's eyes went wide. You're rich? Ignore Ramon. Focus on the job. Ethan grabbed an apron and handed one to James. First rule, comfortable shoes. Second rule, always say behind when walking through the kitchen. Third rule, the customer is usually wrong, but you smile anyway. Got it? For the next 4 hours, Ethan taught James everything Maria had taught him 7 weeks ago. How to hold a tray, how to approach a table, how to read body language to know when people wanted attention versus privacy. It was strange being on the other side of that dynamic, strange and oddly satisfying. You're a good teacher, Maria said while watching Ethan walk James through taking an order. Patient, clear, you actually care if he succeeds. Is that surprising? Kind of, yeah. 7 weeks ago, you could barely manage your own tables. Now you're helping someone else learn. That's growth. James dropped a fork during his first table approach and looked like he might cry. It's fine. Ethan picked it up and handed him a new one. Everyone drops stuff. Just keep moving. Really? Really. I spilled an entire bottle of wine my first week. You're doing great. The relief on James's face was visible. He finished the order without further disasters, and when the customers thanked him, he looked genuinely proud. Ethan remembered that feeling, the first time a customer had said good job instead of complaining. It had mattered in ways he couldn't quite explain. After the shift, James shook his hand with enthusiasm that reminded Ethan uncomfortably of himself 15 years ago, back when he was hungry and ambitious and thought the world owed him everything. Thanks for being cool about my mistakes, James said. I was scared I'd get yelled at. Nobody should get yelled at for learning. Just try to make different mistakes next time. Ethan grabbed his jacket. You did good tonight, James. Keep it up. Driving home, Ethan thought about the version of himself who'd humiliated Claire for spilling wine. The man who'd seen a mistake and immediately weaponized it to make himself feel powerful. That man felt like a stranger now, someone Ethan had been but didn't recognize anymore. Sophie was waiting up when he got home, sitting on the stairs in her pajamas with Mrs. Chen hovering nearby, looking exasperated. I told her you'd be home late, Mrs. Chen said. I wanted to wait. Sophie ran to hug him. Did you teach someone today? Mrs. Chen said that's what you were doing. I did. A new guy named James. He was nervous, but he did great. Like you were nervous your first day? Exactly like that. Sophie grabbed his hand. Will you read me a chapter before bed? We're at the good part where the dragon shows up. Yes, sweetheart. Let's go read about dragons. They read 2 chapters instead of 1, and when Sophie finally fell asleep mid-sentence, Ethan stayed in her room for a while, watching her breathe and thinking about the man he used to be versus the man he was becoming. The old Ethan would have been at the office until midnight, missing bedtime, too consumed by work to notice his daughter growing up without him. The new Ethan, the one who waited tables and taught nervous new hires and kept promises about breakfast, was here. Present. Trying. It wasn't perfect. He still had moments of frustration, still caught himself falling into old patterns, still struggled with the balance between who he'd been and who he wanted to be. But he was trying. And somewhere in Manhattan, Claire Bennett was watching this experiment unfold, deciding whether a billionaire who treated her like she was invisible had proven he could actually see. Week 10 arrived with the first real snow of the season, the kind that made Manhattan look almost magical for about 6 hours before turning into gray slush that nobody wanted to deal with. Ethan showed up for his Monday shift to find the restaurant buzzing with an energy he didn't recognize. Staff were whispering in corners, and Ramon was actually smiling, which happened approximately never. What's going on? Ethan asked Maria while they were setting up their sections. Claire's making an announcement after service tonight, something about the building and future plans. Maria straightened a fork that was already perfectly straight. Rumor is she's finally decided what to do with the property. Whether to sell or renovate or what. Ethan's stomach dropped. 3 months. The contract had said 3 months, and they were 10 weeks in now. Close enough that Claire had probably made her decision about whether he'd learned his lesson, whether he deserved a second chance, whether she was going to sell him the building or tell him to go to hell. You okay? You look like you're going to be sick. Maria touched his arm. I'm fine. Just tired. Liar. But Whatever. Your tables are getting seated. The shift passed in a blur of movement and forced normalcy. Ethan carried trays and took orders and smiled at customers who didn't know that his entire future might be decided in a few hours. His hands were steadier than they'd been that first night 10 weeks ago, his movements more confident, but inside he felt like that same terrified mess who'd signed an insane contract because the alternative was losing everything. Table 6 had a couple arguing in harsh whispers about something involving his mother and a ruined vacation. Table 9 was a businessman who kept checking his phone and ignoring the woman across from him who was clearly trying to save a relationship that was already over. Table 12 was a family with a daughter about Sophie's age who reminded Ethan so much of his own kid that he had to look away. Normal night, normal service, nothing to indicate that everything was about to change. Claire worked the floor too, something she'd been doing more often in the last few weeks. Not just observing, actually serving tables, carrying trays, doing the work alongside everyone else. Ethan caught her eye once during the dinner rush, and she gave him a small smile that could have meant anything or nothing. Service ended at 10:47 p.m. The last customers paid their checks and left, and Ramon locked the front doors while the staff gathered in the main dining room with the nervous energy of people waiting for news that could go either way. Claire stood at the front of the room, still in her uniform, looking more like the shy waitress Ethan had first met than the billionaire who'd bought his debt and changed his life. "Thanks for staying," she said once everyone was settled. "I know it's late and you all want to go home, but this is important." The room went quiet. As most of you know, I inherited this building 8 years ago from my grandfather, and as some of you have figured out, I've been working alongside you for the last 6 years, not because I needed the job, but because I wanted to understand what it meant to run a business from the ground up. To see things from your perspective instead of just from a spreadsheet in some corporate office. A few people nodded. Most just waited. I've had multiple offers to buy this building. Developers who want to turn it into luxury condos or high-end retail or whatever's trendy this year. Good offers, the kind of money that makes financial advisors very excited. Claire paused. I almost accepted one of those offers. Almost convinced myself that selling was the smart business decision and that you'd all find other jobs and everything would work out fine. Ethan's chest tightened. This was it. The moment where she told everyone he'd tried to buy the building, that he'd threatened their jobs, that she was selling to someone else because he'd failed her test. But then something changed. Someone changed, actually. Claire's eyes found Ethan in the crowd. Someone who'd treated this place and everyone in it like we were disposable, learned what it meant to be on the other side of that dynamic. And watching that transformation reminded me why my grandfather left me this building in the first place. The staff started looking around, trying to figure out who she was talking about. A few landed on Ethan, recognition dawning. I'm not selling. Claire said it simply, no dramatics. Instead, I'm investing. Major renovations, updated kitchen equipment, expanded dining space, and most importantly, better wages, better benefits, and profit sharing for everyone who's been here longer than a year. The room erupted. People hugging, crying, asking questions all at once. Ramon actually whooped, which Ethan had never heard him do. Maria grabbed his arm so hard it hurt. We're not losing our jobs? James looked like he might pass out from relief. You're not losing your jobs. You're getting raises. Claire smiled at the chaos she'd created. Details will be rolled out over the next month, but I wanted you to hear it from me first. This place isn't going anywhere, and neither are you. More chaos, more questions, more celebration. Claire answered what she could and promised detailed meetings with everyone individually to discuss the changes. Eventually, people started filtering out, heading home with the kind of happiness that came from unexpected security in an uncertain world. Ramon hugged Claire, which was completely out of character. Maya cried. Even the dishwasher, who never talked to anyone, thanked her in broken English. Ethan stayed in the back, watching it unfold and trying to process what had just happened. She wasn't selling. After everything, after his threats and his arrogance and the hostile takeover attempt she'd stopped, Claire had decided to keep the building and invest in the people who worked there, which meant she'd decided he'd failed her test. The realization sat heavy in his chest. He'd tried, changed his whole life, rebuilt his relationship with his daughter, learned humility and empathy and what it meant to actually see people instead of looking through them, and it hadn't been enough. You're still here. Claire appeared beside him once the last of the staff had left. They were alone in the empty dining room, just like that first night when she'd revealed who she really was. Yeah, I wanted to hear the decision. And what did you think? I think you made the right choice. Your staff deserves security and fair wages, and an owner who actually cares about them. Ethan forced a smile. Congratulations. Your grandfather would be proud. Claire studied him for a long moment. You think I'm not selling to you specifically, aren't you? Walk with me. She grabbed her coat and headed toward the back exit. Ethan followed, confused but willing to see where this went. They ended up on the street behind the building, where the snow was still relatively clean and the city noise was muted by the late hour. Claire leaned against the brick wall and looked up at the building like she was seeing it for the first time. I meant what I said in there. Someone changed. And that someone was you, Ethan. But you're not selling because you don't need to buy it anymore. That's not what this was ever about. Claire turned to look at him. 10 weeks ago, you wanted this building because it was valuable, a good investment, another property to add to your empire. You would have gutted it, fired everyone, and turned it into something that made you richer. I know, and I'm sorry. Let me finish. Her voice was gentle but firm. You don't want that anymore. I can see it in how you work, how you talk to the staff, how you looked when I announced those raises and benefits. You were happy for them, Ethan. Genuinely happy that people you used to dismiss as obstacles were getting something good. So what does that mean? It means you passed the test. Not by earning the right to buy my building, but by realizing you don't want to anymore. You don't want to be the person who destroys things for profit. You want to be the person who builds things that matter. Claire pulled out a folder from her bag, because of course she had a folder ready, which is why I have a different proposal. Ethan took the folder, his hands shaking slightly. Inside were architectural plans, financial projections, and a partnership agreement that made his brain stutter trying to process. You want me to co-invest in the renovation? As a partner? A silent partner with no operational control. Your money, my management, shared profits that get reinvested into expansion and staff development. Claire pointed to a section of the plans. I want to turn this into something special, Ethan. Not just one restaurant, but a model for how businesses can be profitable and treat their workers fairly. And I want your expertise to make it happen. Why? After everything I did? Because you learned. Actually learned, not just performed learning to get what you wanted. Claire's expression softened. My grandfather used to say that people reveal themselves in how they treat those who can do nothing for them. 10 weeks ago, you treated people like they were invisible. Tonight, you stayed late to celebrate their good news, even though you thought it meant you'd lost. That's real change, Ethan. Ethan looked at the plan, seeing a vision that was smarter and more humane than anything he would have conceived 3 months ago. I don't deserve this. Probably not. But my grandfather also said that second chances aren't about deserving them. They're about what you do with them. Claire held out her hand. So what do you want to do with yours? The answer should have required thought, calculation, risk assessment. The old Ethan would have spent weeks analyzing the deal, finding angles, protecting himself. The new Ethan just shook her hand. I want to be part of something that matters, something that proves business doesn't have to be cruel to be successful. Good, because I'm going to hold you to that. Claire's smile was genuine now, warm. And Ethan, you can stop working the floor. You've fulfilled your contract, and then some, unless you want to keep going. Can I? Keep working shifts, I mean. Maybe just 1 a week instead of 3. Claire's eyebrows went up. You actually want to keep waitressing? I want to remember what this feels like. Being part of something instead of just owning it. Actually knowing the people who make the business work instead of just seeing them as labor costs. Ethan looked back at the building. 1 shift a week keeps me honest. Reminds me why we're doing this. 1 shift a week it is, but you're getting paid market rate this time, not minimum wage. And you're training new hires, since you've apparently gotten good at that. They stood there in the snow for a while, 2 billionaires who'd found each other in the strangest possible way and somehow ended up building something that might actually change lives. I should get home, Ethan finally said. Sophie has a thing at school tomorrow morning, and I promised I'd be there early to help set up. How is Sophie? Good. Really good, actually. Happy. She keeps asking when she can meet you since Mrs. Chen apparently told her about the nice lady who made Daddy learn to be nicer. Claire laughed. I'd like to meet her too. Maybe once this partnership is official and we're not just former adversaries working through complicated feelings. Are they complicated? Our feelings? Aren't they? Claire met his eyes, and there was something there that Ethan hadn't noticed before. Or maybe he had noticed and just hadn't let himself acknowledge it because acknowledging it meant admitting he was capable of feeling something other than grief and anger. Yeah, they're definitely complicated. Ethan clutched the folder. I'll have my lawyers review this and get back to you within the week. Is that okay? That's perfect. Take your time. Make sure it's what you want. Ethan started to walk away, then stopped. Claire? Yeah? Thank you. For not destroying me when you could have. For giving me a chance to remember who I used to be before I lost myself. For believing I could be better. You did the hard part, Ethan. I just created the circumstances. She pulled her coat tighter against the cold. Now go home to your daughter, and don't forget about breakfast tomorrow. I won't. The drive home felt different somehow, lighter, like Ethan had been carrying something heavy for years and finally found a place to set it down. Sophie was asleep, of course. It was almost midnight, but she'd left a drawing on his pillow that showed two stick figures holding hands. One was labeled Daddy, and the other was labeled Claire, with a heart between them. Mrs. Chen was going to have some explaining to do. But when Ethan woke up at 6 a.m. to make breakfast, Mrs. Chen just smiled knowingly and didn't say anything except, Sophie thinks anyone who makes you happy must be wonderful. Children are simple like that. We're not. It's just a business partnership. Of course it is. That's why you're smiling at your coffee like it personally did something wonderful. Mrs. Chen started pulling out pancake ingredients. Complicated feelings, Mr. Calloway. We all have them. The trick is figuring out what to do with them. Sophie came downstairs in her school uniform, saw the pancake ingredients, and cheered. They made breakfast together, a routine now, something Ethan looked forward to more than any business meeting. Mrs. Chen says you have a new friend, Sophie said while mixing batter with more enthusiasm than precision. Mrs. Chen talks too much. I do not. I observe and report. Mrs. Chen handed Sophie more flour. Her name is Claire. She's my business partner. Ethan tried to keep his voice casual. We're working on a project together. Is she nice? Very nice. She's smart and fair, and she believes people can change if they really try. Do you like her? The question was innocent, the way all of Sophie's questions were. But it hit something in Ethan's chest that he thought was permanently closed off after his wife died. Yeah, sweetheart, I like her. Good. You should have friends. Mrs. Chen says you work too much to have friends. Mrs. Chen should write a book about everything she says. It would be a bestseller, Mrs. Chen smirked. They ate pancakes and talked about Sophie's school project and the class field trip Ethan had volunteered to chaperone next month. Normal family breakfast, the kind Ethan had taken for granted before his wife got sick and then couldn't have any more after she died. He'd gotten it back. Not the same as before. Nothing would ever be the same, but different, new. Built on foundations he'd had to learn from scratch at 32 years old while waiting tables and remembering what it meant to be human. The partnership with Claire became official 3 weeks later, after lawyers reviewed everything, and Ethan's board had approximately 17 collective heart attacks about their CEO co-investing in a restaurant renovation. It's not about the restaurant. Ethan explained to David, Marcus, and Richard during a meeting where they all looked at him like he'd lost his mind. It's about proving that our company can invest in projects that prioritize people alongside profits, that we can be successful without being cruel. That's very noble, Ethan. It's also financially risky and completely off-brand for our usual acquisitions. David pulled up spreadsheets that showed exactly how risky. We're a real estate development company, not a hospitality group. We're whatever I decide we are. And I'm deciding we need to diversify into ventures that actually improve communities instead of just displacing them. Ethan stood his ground in a way that felt different than his old authoritarianism. Firmer, somehow. More certain. This partnership with Claire is the first step. If it works, when it works, we'll expand the model. Invest in businesses that treat workers fairly, share profits, contribute to neighborhoods instead of destroying them. You've changed. Marcus said it like an observation, not a judgment. I hope so. The old version of me was miserable and making everyone around him miserable too. This version might actually build something worth leaving to my daughter. They approved the investment, though David grumbled about it for weeks. The renovation started in January with Claire managing the project and Ethan consulting on the business structure. They met twice a week to review progress, discuss challenges, and argue about details in ways that felt more like collaboration than conflict. "You can't cheap out on the kitchen equipment," Claire said during one meeting, pointing to Ethan's suggested budget cuts. "Ramon needs commercial-grade everything, or the whole operation falls apart." "I'm not cheating out, I'm being fiscally responsible." "You're being cheap. There's a difference." She pulled up comparison data. "Good equipment lasts 20 years and improves efficiency. Cheap equipment breaks in 5 and costs more in repairs. Do the actual math, Ethan." He did the math. She was right, as usual. "You're enjoying this," Ethan said after conceding the point. "Enjoying what?" "Being right, proving that you know more about running this business than I do." "I absolutely am enjoying that. You spent years thinking you knew everything. I like watching you learn that you don't." But Claire was smiling when she said it, and the smile reached her eyes in a way that made Ethan's chest do something complicated. They started having dinner together after their meetings. Just two colleagues discussing business over meals, nothing inappropriate or complicated. Except it was complicated and they both knew it. "Sophie keeps asking when she can meet you," Ethan mentioned during one of those dinners, somewhere around late February when the renovation was halfway done. "What does she know about me?" "That you're my business partner, that you're smart and kind, that you taught me to be a better person." Ethan paused. "And that Mrs. Chen thinks you're wonderful," which apparently is high praise. "Mrs. Chen met me once for 15 minutes. She's very perceptive. It's terrifying, honestly." Claire laughed and the sound made something warm bloom in Ethan's chest. "I'd like to meet Sophie, if you think it's appropriate." "I think she'd love it. Fair warning, though, she's 7 and has no filter. She'll probably ask if we're dating within the first 5 minutes." "Are we?" Claire's expression was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "I don't know. Are we?" Ethan set down his wine glass. "Because I thought we were just business partners, but then I started looking forward to our meetings more than anything else in my week. And when you smile at me like that, I forget what we're supposed to be discussing. And I think about you when I should be thinking about quarterly reports." "That's very honest. I'm trying to be better about that. Honesty, vulnerability, all the things I used to think were weaknesses." Claire reached across the table and took his hand. "I think about you too, more than I probably should for someone who started this whole thing planning to teach you a lesson about humility. How'd that work out?" "Better than expected. Turns out watching someone actually change is more compelling than I anticipated." She squeezed his hand. "But this is complicated, Ethan. We have a business partnership, a history that started with you threatening my employees, and a significant power imbalance, even though we're technically equals now." "I know, and if you're not interested, that's completely fine. I'll understand and we can keep this professional." Ethan meant it, even though the thought of Claire just being his business partner felt like losing something he'd barely acknowledged wanting. "I didn't say I wasn't interested. I said it was complicated." Claire smiled. "Let me meet Sophie first. See if I can handle the chaos of your actual life instead of just the controlled environment of business meetings. Then we'll figure out what this is." Sophie met Claire 3 weeks later at a Sunday brunch that Mrs. Chen orchestrated with the precision of a military operation. "Remember, be polite. Don't ask rude questions. And for the love of everything, do not mention that drawing you made of your father and Claire holding hands." Mrs. Chen straightened Sophie's dress for the 3rd time. "Why not?" "Because adults are weird about feelings, and we have to let them figure things out slowly." "That's dumb." "Yes, it is, but that's how it works." Claire arrived exactly on time, bringing flowers for Mrs. Chen and a book for Sophie about a dragon who learned to be brave. "I heard you like dragons." Claire knelt down to Sophie's level, not talking down to her the way most adults did. "I love dragons. Daddy and I are reading a series about them." Sophie grabbed the book and immediately started flipping through the pages. "This one looks so cool. Can we read it tonight, Daddy?" "Absolutely." Brunch was chaotic in the way family meals with a 7-year-old always were. Sophie talked nonstop about school and her friends and the science project she was working on about butterflies. Claire listened with genuine interest, asked thoughtful questions, and didn't flinch when Sophie spilled juice across the table. "You're good with her," Ethan said quietly, while Sophie was showing Claire her butterfly research upstairs. "She's easy to be good with. She's smart and funny and exactly the right amount of chaotic." Claire helped Sophie spread out her notes on the floor. You're raising her well, Ethan. I'm trying, still figuring it out as I go. That's all any parent can do. When Claire left 3 hours later, Sophie hugged her goodbye with the easy affection of someone who'd decided they liked a person and didn't see any reason to hide it. I like her, Sophie announced after Claire's car pulled away. She's smart and she doesn't treat me like I'm stupid. Can she come over again? Maybe, if she wants to. She wants to. I could tell. Sophie grabbed her new dragon book. Mrs. Chen was right. She is wonderful. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. You should marry her. Sophie, what? You like her, she likes you. She's nice to me and Mrs. Chen approves. That's basically all the important stuff. Sophie headed upstairs with her book. Adults make everything so complicated. Mrs. Chen appeared from the kitchen wearing a knowing smile. Out of the mouths of babes? Not you too. I'm just saying, Mr. Calloway, when something works, you don't analyze it to death. You appreciate it. She started clearing the table. That woman is good for you. Don't mess it up by overthinking. Ethan didn't mess it up. Over the next 2 months, he and Claire moved from business dinners to actual dates, from professional partnership to something that felt like the beginning of something real. It wasn't smooth. They argued about business decisions and personal boundaries and how to balance their complicated history with their evolving present. Claire pushed back when Ethan fell into old patterns of assuming he knew best, and Ethan learned to actually listen instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. You're doing that thing again, Claire said during one argument about the restaurant's marketing strategy. What thing? The thing where you think you're right and everyone else just needs to see your logic. I have a marketing degree and 6 years of industry experience. Maybe trust that I know what I'm talking about. Ethan bit back his instinctive defensive response and actually considered her point. You're right. I'm sorry. Tell me your plan again, and this time I'll listen instead of formulating counter-arguments. Was that growth I just witnessed? From Ethan Calloway? Someone alert the media. Shut up and explain your marketing strategy. She did, and it was brilliant, and Ethan approved it without trying to modify it to feel like it was his idea too. Small victories, but they added up. The restaurant reopened in May with a celebration that drew crowds and media attention and genuine excitement about what Claire and Ethan had built together. The staff had their raises and profit sharing. The kitchen gleamed with new equipment. The dining room had been expanded and modernized while maintaining the historic character that made it special. And most importantly, it felt like a place built on respect instead of exploitation. This is what we're capable of when we actually care about people, Claire said during her speech at the reopening. When we see workers as partners instead of costs, when we build businesses that serve communities instead of extracting from them. This restaurant is proof that you can be profitable and humane, that success doesn't require cruelty. The staff applauded. Ramon actually got emotional, and Ethan stood in the back watching Claire command the room and realized he was completely in love with her. Not because she was brilliant or successful or beautiful, though she was all those things, but because she'd seen him at his absolute worst and still believed he could be better, because she'd torn him down and built him back up into someone he actually recognized in the mirror, because she made him want to keep growing instead of staying comfortable. You're staring, Sophie whispered. She'd insisted on coming to the reopening, dressed in her favorite dress, and taking her role as Ethan's date very seriously. I'm observing. You're staring at Claire like she's the only person in the room. Mrs. Chen says that's how you know someone's in love. Mrs. Chen needs to stop analyzing my feelings. She's usually right, though. Sophie grabbed his hand. Are you going to tell her? Tell her what? That you love her. Adults are so dumb about this stuff. Just say it. It's complicated, sweetheart. No, it's not. You love her. She loves you. Everyone can see it, except apparently you two. Sophie sighed like she was the adult, and Ethan was the clueless child. Just tell her, Daddy, before someone else does. Ethan waited until after the event, until the crowds had left, and it was just him and Claire doing a final walkthrough of the restaurant. We did it. Claire ran her hand along the new bar top. Built something that actually matters. You did it. I just provided capital and occasionally useful business insight. You did more than that. You proved that people can change, That someone who started out threatening my staff could end up being the partner who fights hardest for their rights and wages. Claire turned to face him. That's not nothing, Ethan. I had a good teacher. You were a willing student. That's the part that matters. They stood there as the empty restaurant, surrounded by evidence of what they'd built together. And Ethan thought about Sophie's advice to just say it. I'm in love with you. The words came out less smooth than he'd planned. I know that's complicated given how we started and the business partnership and Sophie and all the reasons this might be a terrible idea. But I'm in love with you and I wanted you to know. Claire smiled, slow and genuine. That's good. Because I'm in love with you too, and I was starting to worry you'd never figure it out. Sophie said everyone could see it except us. Sophie's a smart kid. Claire closed the distance between them. So what do we do about this? I have no idea. I'm terrible at relationships. My track record is one marriage that ended in tragedy and a decade of emotional unavailability. Well, I'm a billionaire who spent 6 years pretending to be a waitress and then blackmailed you into manual labor as a teaching moment, so we're both disasters. Claire took his hand. But maybe we can figure it out together. Yeah, I'd like that. They kissed in the empty restaurant where everything had started and ended and begun again, and it felt like the first honest thing Ethan had done in years. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. Ethan still struggled with old patterns, still had moments where he wanted to control everything and everyone around him. Claire still pushed back when he got too authoritative, and they still argued about business decisions and personal boundaries, but they figured it out. Slowly, imperfectly, with help from Sophie's blunt 7-year-old wisdom and Mrs. Chen's knowing observations. The restaurant became a model that they expanded to 3 more locations over the next 2 years. Ethan restructured his company's entire acquisition strategy to prioritize community impact alongside profits. Sophie got older and wiser, and never stopped being exactly the right amount of chaos. And somewhere in the middle of all that growth and change and building something that actually mattered, Ethan realized he'd become someone his wife would recognize again. Someone who saw people instead of obstacles. Someone who used power to lift others up instead of pushing them down. Someone who'd learned that being broken down and rebuilt by a woman who refused to accept less than his best self was the greatest gift he'd ever received. You're thinking too much again, Claire said one night while they were having dinner at the original restaurant location. It was their tradition, every Friday night, same table where everything had fallen apart 3 years ago. I'm thinking about how different everything is now, how different I am. Better different or worse different? Better. Definitely better. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. Thank you. For not destroying me when you could have. For seeing something worth saving underneath all the arrogance and cruelty. You did the hard work, Ethan. I just created the circumstances. Claire squeezed his hand. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you walked into my restaurant that night, even though you were absolutely terrible. I was the worst, the absolute worst, but you got better. She smiled. And that's what matters, not where we start, but whether we're willing to grow. Sophie appeared at their table. She'd been helping in the kitchen with Ramon, who'd become something like a grandfather figure to her over the years. Ramon says dinner's almost ready and you two need to stop being gross and romantic because you're making the other customers jealous. Ramon should mind his business, but Ethan was smiling. He says that's impossible when you two are this obvious. Sophie climbed into the chair between them. Can I have the pasta tonight? With the sauce that's really good? You can have whatever you want, sweetheart. Then I want the pasta, and I want you guys to stop being weird about how much you like each other, and just be normal. Sophie grabbed a breadstick. You're getting married anyway. Everyone knows it. Ethan and Claire looked at each other across the table, caught somewhere between embarrassment and amusement. You're very sure about that, Claire said. Mrs. Chen told me Daddy's going to propose soon. She saw him looking at rings. Sophie bit into the breadstick. Adults think they're so sneaky, but they're really obvious. Mrs. Chen is fired, Ethan muttered. No, she's not. You'd be lost without her. Sophie finished her breadstick. So when are you asking? Because I already told my friends at school that Claire's going to be my stepmom, and if you don't propose soon, I'm going to look silly. Sophie. What? You love her, she loves you. You already act like a family. Just make it official so we can all stop pretending this isn't happening. Claire was laughing now, genuine laughter that filled the space around them. She makes a compelling argument. She makes a terrifying argument. She's 7 and already running my life. Someone has to. You're bad at it when left unsupervised. Sophie grinned. Are you going to propose or what? Ethan looked at Claire, who was watching him with those sharp eyes that had seen through every defense he'd ever built. The woman who'd torn him apart and rebuilt him into someone better. The partner who challenged him and supported him and never let him get away with being less than his best self. The person he wanted to spend the rest of his life trying to deserve. What do you think? He asked Claire. Should I propose? Or is Sophie getting ahead of herself? Sophie's never gotten ahead of herself in her life. She just sees what's obvious to everyone else. Claire's smile was soft and genuine. So yeah, Ethan, you should probably propose, eventually, when you're ready. I'm ready now. The words came easy, easier than anything Ethan had said in years. I've been ready since about 6 months after you blackmailed me into waiting tables and taught me what it meant to actually be human. I was just waiting for the right moment. This is the right moment, Sophie said with absolute certainty. Right here, right now in the restaurant where everything started. That's romantic. I don't have the ring with me. So? Words first, ring later. That's how proposals work. Sophie gestured impatiently. Come on, Daddy, don't overthink it. Ethan stood up and moved to Claire's side of the table. The restaurant around them had gone quiet. The staff watching, other diners paying attention, Ramon probably filming from the kitchen. This is happening in front of everyone, sir, Claire said. Yeah, is that okay? It's perfect. She took his hand. Ask me. Claire Bennett, you're the most frustrating, brilliant, compassionate person I've ever met. You saw through every defense I'd built and refused to accept anything less than my best self. You taught me to be human again when I'd forgotten how. You showed me that power without empathy is just cruelty, and that real strength comes from lifting people up instead of pushing them down. Ethan's voice was steady, sure. I love you, Sophie loves you. Even Mrs. Chen loves you, which is basically impossible. Will you marry me and continue tolerating my mess while I try to be worthy of you for the rest of my life? That's the worst proposal I've ever heard, but Claire was crying and smiling at the same time. Yes, obviously yes. The restaurant erupted, staff cheering, customers applauding, Ramon yelling something in Spanish that was probably inappropriate but definitely supportive. Sophie hugged them both and announced to the entire room that she was going to be a flower girl, and they better not try to talk her out of it. And Ethan stood there in the middle of the chaos he'd helped create. The restaurant, the relationship, the life he'd rebuilt from the ashes of who he used to be, and felt something he hadn't felt since before his wife died. Complete. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. He still had bad days and old patterns and moments where he forgot the lessons he'd learned. But he had people who called him on it, who loved him enough to push back, who saw his potential and refused to let him settle for anything less. That was worth more than every building he'd ever bought and every deal he'd ever closed. That was everything. Later that night, after dinner was finished and Sophie was asleep, and Mrs. Chen had gone home wearing a smile that suggested she'd known this was coming all along, Ethan and Claire stood on the balcony of his penthouse looking out at the city. You know this means you're stuck with me now, Claire said, leaning against him. All my chaos and high standards and tendency to call you out when you're being an idiot. I'm counting on it. Someone has to keep me honest. And you're stuck with Sophie and Mrs. Chen and Friday night dinners at the restaurant and all the messy reality that comes with actually living a life instead of just accumulating wealth. Best deal I ever made. Ethan kissed the top of her head. Thank you for saving me from myself. You saved yourself, Ethan. I just created the circumstances that made it possible. Claire turned to face him. That's what love is, I think. Not fixing someone or changing them, just creating space for them to become who they already were underneath all the damage. When did you get so wise? 6 years of serving rich people taught me a lot about human nature. Turns out most of you are just scared kids in expensive suits, trying to prove you matter by accumulating things that don't actually mean anything. That's dark. It's true. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Claire gestured at the city below them. Look at what we built, Ethan. A business that proves you can be profitable without being cruel. A partnership that proves power and empathy aren't mutually exclusive. A life that proves people can change if they actually try. You think other people will follow the model? Some will, some won't. But we proved it's possible. That matters. They stood there watching the city breathe. Two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of old patterns and built something new from the pieces. The restaurant kept growing. The model expanded. Other businesses started adopting similar profit-sharing and wage structures, proving that Claire and Ethan's partnership wasn't just an anomaly, but a viable path forward. Ethan never stopped working one shift a week at the original location. Every Friday night, he'd put on the uniform and serve tables alongside staff who'd watched him transform from arrogant billionaire to something approaching a decent human being. "You don't have to keep doing this," Maria told him one Friday, about 5 years after that first terrible shift. "You're literally the co-owner. Nobody expects you to wait tables." "I expect me to. Keeps me grounded." Ethan balanced a tray with the easy competence that came from years of practice. "Reminds me where I came from and where I could end up again if I stopped paying attention." "You're weird, boss." "Yeah, but I'm consistently weird, which counts for something." Sophie grew up watching her father work shifts at the restaurant, learning that labor had dignity regardless of who was doing it. She learned to treat service workers with respect because she'd seen her father be service workers. She learned that wealth was a tool, not an identity, and that how you used power mattered more than how much of it you had. On her 16th birthday, she asked if she could work a shift at the restaurant. "You don't have to do that," Ethan said. "You're not being punished for anything." "I know, but you and Claire always talk about how working there changed your life and taught you important things. I want to understand what that means." Sophie pulled her hair back. "Plus, Ramon said he'd teach me to make his secret sauce if I can handle the dinner rush without crying." "Ramon's a sadist. Ramon's great. You're just still scared of him." She worked the shift, held her own, and came home exhausted and exhilarated in ways Ethan remembered from his own early days. "That was the hardest thing I've ever done." Sophie collapsed on the couch. "My feet hurt, my back hurts, and some guy literally snapped his fingers at me like I was a dog." "What did you do?" Smiled and got him his water refill. Then Claire saw what happened and talked to him about respecting service workers, and he left a 40% tip and an apology note. Sophie grinned. "She's scary when she wants to be. That's why I married her. That and the fact that she's basically perfect." "Nobody's perfect, sweetheart, but she's pretty close." Claire appeared in the doorway. "I heard that. And for the record, I'm absolutely not perfect. I'm just good at hiding my flaws behind competence and strategic planning." "See? Perfect," Sophie laughed. They'd gotten married 2 years after the proposal, in a small ceremony at the restaurant with staff and family, and Sophie as the world's most enthusiastic flower girl. Nothing fancy, nothing ostentatious, just two people promising to keep choosing each other and calling each other on their respective nonsense for as long as they both lived. It wasn't a fairy tale. Real life never was, but it was real. Built on honesty and growth and the understanding that love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone willing to keep trying to be better alongside you. "You're thinking too loud again," Claire said, settling onto the couch next to Ethan while Sophie went to shower off the restaurant smell. "Just reflecting. We've built something good here. Not just the business, but this, us, the life we've created. We have, and it almost didn't happen because you were too stubborn to see past your own pain for years." Claire took his hand. "I'm glad you finally figured it out. I'm glad you were patient enough to teach me, and ruthless enough to force the lesson when patience wasn't working. Best decision I ever made. Well, second best after deciding not to sell the building to you 3 years ago. That still stings a little." "Good. Keeps you humble." Claire kissed him. "I love you, Ethan Calloway. Every messy, complicated, still learning part of you. I love you too. Even though you're terrifying and probably smarter than me and won't let me get away with anything. Especially because of those things." Years passed. The business grew. Sophie went to college and came back with her own ideas about how to expand the model internationally. Ethan's company fully transformed into something that prioritized community impact alongside profits, becoming an industry leader in ethical development. And through it all, every Friday night, Ethan put on a waiter's uniform and worked the floor at the restaurant where everything had changed. Not because he had to, but because remembering where he'd come from kept him honest about where he was going. "Table 6 needs a water refill," Maria said one Friday. She was management now, but still worked occasional shifts because she liked staying connected to the floor. On it. Ethan grabbed a pitcher and headed over. The couple at table 6 smiled when he approached. Young, probably early 30s, clearly on a date that was going well. "Thank you," the woman said as Ethan filled her glass. "You've been wonderful all night, really attentive." "Just doing my job. Enjoy your meal." As he walked away, he overheard the man say, "That guy looks familiar, like I should know him from somewhere." "Probably just has one of those faces," the woman replied. Ethan smiled to himself. That was the whole point. To be seen as a person doing a job, not a billionaire slumming it for show. To actually be part of something instead of just owning it. Claire caught his eye from across the dining room and gave him the smile that still made his chest tight even after years of marriage. Sophie was working the floor too. She did one shift a month between her graduate program and starting her own socially conscious development firm. Ramon was in the kitchen creating magic with ingredients and shouting at line cooks who'd learned that his gruff exterior hid genuine affection. Mrs. Chen was having dinner at her favorite table with friends, pretending she didn't still keep track of Ethan's every move. And Ethan Calloway, former ruthless billionaire, reformed asshole, current waiter and partner, and father and husband, carried water pitchers and cleared plates and lived the kind of life his wife would have recognized. The kind of life that mattered. Not because it was perfect or easy or without struggle, but because it was real. Built on the understanding that power meant nothing without empathy, that wealth was worthless without purpose, and that the only thing worth building was something that made the world a little bit better for everyone in it. That was the lesson. Not the one Ethan thought he was learning when Claire first made him put on that uniform, but the one that saved his life anyway.